Hello, Topical, and welcome back to your favorite podcast where we once again get into the nitty gritty. We dive deep into things, and we really try and understand each other because you know what? In today's political climate, in today's ever closing world where everyone is surrounded by sound boxes and glass boxes and just a lot of boxes, really, it's good to round out your personality by listening to this and just round out your perspective. So I'm glad you're listening today, and I'm glad to have my guest on today, Nathaniel Souss. How you doing?
Hi.
You having a good day?
Yeah, so far, I've only been up for 2 hours, so
Mm,
hasn't really started yet, but we'll see.
I've been up for 26 hours, so let's see how this goes.
What can we start with asking why you were up for 26 hours?
Well, the problem was I was up for 11 hours the previous night, so I had to make up for it. And
Oh, like
unfortunately,
resetting your sleep schedule.
yeah, and unfortunately, I take my sleep average very seriously.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm a bit
I,
ashamed of it, to be honest. I average like 7 hours of sleep a night, even though I'd like to be doing five. But at least I can't say my brain's being hampered.
well, you need like at least even seven. I don't think I could live off of seven for like any sustainable period of time. Like I can do seven during the week, but on the weekends, like if I haven't had enough sleep during the week, I just automatically sleep for 10 hours. Like I didn't get a lot of sleep yesterday or the day before because I was at a friend's house, and last night I slept for 10 hours straight. Just did not wake up at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. What time do you usually go to bed?
I like to go to bed like more around midnight. Like I go to bed at 11 on school nights, and it just feels really wrong to me, even though it's just an hour difference. Just the physically knowing that it's not midnight yet, just for some reason, really bothers me and makes it difficult for me to sleep actually. But I usually go to bed at midnight, and my ideal waking up time is 9, which is kind of a problem on school days because
Yes.
you have to be up at 6.
I,
So,
I was gonna say you can be one of those people that doesn't have a first period class, but I don't think that really looks great for colleges. Not that
well,
you have to
no,
worry about that anymore.
no, not really. But I can't just not show up to first period.
Yeah. So today, what we really have in store is I'm planning on talking about Star Wars a lot because, frankly, I haven't had anyone to talk about Star Wars with for like the past 4 months. So that's going to be on the docket. We're going to go through rankings of movies, what we thought of the past three, because really I haven't talked to you about Star Wars since Disney acquired the rights, and which is bizarre that it's been that long. But yeah,
Yeah,
and then get into some video games after that. And if we still have some time, which frankly I doubt, just because of how much Star Wars news there's been in the past 3 years, we'll get into personal questions and maybe we'll get into philosophy. So
okay.
I guess we'll start with the obvious stuff. Do you want to go start from the past of Star Wars, or go from the future and work backwards?
Well, actually, this is good that you brought this up because I was actually just reading a lot about the upcoming Star Wars movies, like the Han Solo movie and stuff like that.
Future it
Um,
is.
and I want to know your opinion on the new, like, not having Harrison Ford as Han Solo, which obviously they would have had to do because it's a movie about young Han Solo, and
Yeah.
obviously they can't have Harrison Ford portraying a 20-year-old or so Han Solo. But a lot of people are like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to enjoy this movie, not because it's not going to be a good movie, but because it's just going to be so wrong feeling like with Harrison Ford not being Han Solo. So, what do you think about, the whole he can't be, who only Harrison Ford can be Han Solo and that whole mentality?
I mean, it's always very difficult for people to get over the actors that they've had playing their characters that they have in their mind for the longest time, and that's a big problem in movies where like the people that represent them are like inextricably tied to them, especially when you have a movie franchise that's been going on for like 40 years now, and like people grew up around this character, but for the most part, it seems like it was a good decision, just because it would have made no sense to do a CGI Han Solo for 2 hours. We saw how that went with Leia. It worked okay
Yeah, yeah.
at some points, but it wasn't great overall. And even though Alden Ehrenreich, the new actor for Han Solo, I've heard some people be like, "Oh, he looks too much like a drug addict or whatever to really play Han Solo." I mean, you gotta get over it at some point and just accept that like a new actor is there, and that really gets into something that I wonder how people deal with this in movies where they know the actor outside of the movie that's being played on the big screens, obviously, and like how they do a separation from reality that you have to really enjoy a movie, especially like Star Wars, uh, from someone like Harrison Ford, where they're like, oh, it's Harrison Ford, and they're not like, oh, it's Han Solo.
Yeah, I think on a similar route, like uh, my friend can't watch any movie that Daniel Radcliffe is in because he can only see him as Harry Potter. But that ruins like he saw the Woman in Black and he just couldn't get over the fact like why isn't he blasting the weird death lady with magic? He's Harry Potter kind of thing. And I think that's true that people if people want to let a movie get ruined for them because they can't deal with like oh that's an actor that I recognize from something else or not the actor that I recognize at this role. um, I think that's kind of just their prerogative, but at the same time why let that movie be ruined for you? I mean I definitely feel weird about it not being Daniel or Harrison Ford, but that's not going to stop me from seeing and enjoying the movie if it's good.
Yeah, and it's an open book right now if it's going to be good or not, just based on the recent performances in the movies and also the material that they're working off of. It seems like they're going to have to start creating a bunch of new backstory for Han Solo, just because the only thing that they really have to go off of right now is him meeting Chewbacca and then the Corellian Run, and that's what, like 30 minutes in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people are really eager to see how they handle this because there was a lot of apparently the timeline places it just a year after the prologue of Rogue One.
Hmm.
And I guess people should know about spoilers for the movies if
Yeah.
they're listening to this part of the podcast. But um, in Rogue One, director Krennic has this shuttle, and it's explained that it's like an early model Imperial shuttle. People were annoyed at first that there wasn't like the classic Imperial shuttle in the movie, but they were like, this is kind of like an interim phase shuttle between the Republic class and the Imperial class. And people are curious: are they actually going to keep up with that? Was it an excuse that they made? Um, just little details that people are hoping that they keep, continuity with, because I think people are worried, even though there's not really a precedent for it, are worried that Disney's going to be like, let's just crank out a movie and not worry about the fine details. Because for a lot of people, Star Wars is about the fine details and everything, um, which is a whole other beast of a topic because I don't necessarily agree with that. But I think this movie, and I think movies in general nowadays that are sequels or remasters or redos of older movies, people just really, really, really want every single detail to be precisely how they want it to be. And
Yes.
I think that's what's going to determine for a lot of people whether this movie's good or not.
Yeah, that's a big problem with Star Wars fans right now. It's not even that they want the movie to be perfect; they want the movie to be perfect for them. And everyone obviously interprets a movie differently, so you can't make everyone happy. And I think that's something Disney is ready to accept at this point. But just on the finer details, note that seems like a concern for a lot of fans right now. Just with Disney not being lackadaisical with like their treatment of the material, but just like playing on the edge and like making people worried. But for the most part, it seems like Disney's never been the kind of company to just crank out movies. It seems like they usually do a lot of quality stuff.
Yeah, and going off of the whole like people wanting it the way they want it thing, I think the controversy around The Last Jedi was kind of unwarranted. A lot of people were really irritated at some of the plot points that they seemed to gloss over in that movie. And one of the major ones there was actually the whole thing that her parents don't matter, that
Hmm.
they were nobodies that sold her for drinking money and
Yes.
everything. And people were like, oh, there was no setup for that. There were all these fan theories about, oh, she's Obi-Wan's daughter, she's Luke's daughter, stuff like that. Um, that Kylo Ren and her were brother and sister and whatnot. But I saw this video on YouTube that made a lot of really good points that were like really concrete as well, like really hard to refute about how like the fact that her parents were worthless was set up in The Force Awakens as well, and it like urged people to go back and rewatch Force Awakens knowing what they know from The Last Jedi. And there are a lot of like at the time they would have been subtle hints, but when you go back and watch it after you watch The Last Jedi, it's obvious and very blatant that they were setting up the thing where Rey's parents were inconsequential to her, you know, journey. Um, and there's one scene in particular where she's confronting someone. I can't remember who it is, but she's confronting someone, and they say deep down, she's talking about her parents. It's Kaz, not Kaz. Who's the short little girl with the alien girl with the glasses that has Anakin's lightsaber or
Uh,
Luke's lightsaber?
I'm really bad with names. I'm just thinking Rose right now, but it's definitely not her. Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay,
whoever
whoever it
that is,
was.
though, she's talking to her and she says, like, I need to figure out who my parents are. And she says, I think you know who they are. And it's like, oh, they were setting this up from the beginning. But people still get pissed off about it because they wanted it to be some grandiose, like, she's Obi-Wan's daughter or some, like, meta thing like that. Because there's this. There's this like popular fan theory that the entire series is actually a story about Obi-Wan and not a story about like Anakin or Luke or any of that. Um, and I think people were annoyed that that's not how it went. Um, there's just a lot. There are a lot of things that people are angry over and claiming like, oh, the new director took things and made it awful. But a lot of these things were set up before the Last Jedi was even like conceptualized. I think.
Yeah, and be it as it may, it was a weird choice to have a different director for all three of the movies. It seemed like it was hedging their bet, but I don't think anyone had a real problem with The Force Awakens, so that didn't really seem necessary. And I am worried that in the coming years, when we're going back and looking through the whole trilogy, it'll just look like it has a different tone or like a different theme throughout each movie, which isn't a terrible thing in a trilogy, but you like a continued narrative to be going. And that's really something I never understood with the whole fan reactions to Rey's parents being insignificant. I never understood why the fans wanted some like incestual Star Wars family where and like it's just like everyone is related to each other and like oh Rey's Obi-Wan's daughter and oh you got Luke over here and Luke's still here and you got Han Solo over there and then you got Kylo Ren obviously and there's Leia and like it just seems like a messy family tree and like it makes the world smaller and when you're trying to create a space opera you want the universe to seem as big as possible so that didn't really make sense to me and then also I don't really see the problem with having her parents be insignificant. I get that people want their fan theories to be correct and they want Obi-Wan to get more screen time or more significance in the story but I mean it just seems silly to me at least.
Yeah, and I'd actually almost argue that the people were actually a little they liked The Force Awakens, but they were like the reason why I like The Force Awakens is because it's a New Hope dash two. Like
Yes.
that movie was basically carbon cut, copy paste. This is a New Hope, and I think that the transition to the new director did a wonder for that narrative because they kept you may have noticed there were a lot of parallels between very Star Wars movies and The Last Jedi. Like there's the AT-AT walkers attacking the whitewashed base thing, and the rebels have to escape at the end of the movie.
Yes.
That was basically just an Empire Strikes Back, but it's not it's visually paralleling and thematically paralleling, not literally paralleling. Whereas I think The Force Awakens was just literally a rehashed A New Hope. Um, and it was good, but it was like, well, we've seen all of this before. We want new things, and obviously there's a fine line between something new and something outlandish. I think one person that I was reading on Reddit put it very nicely. They said, we want things to be new, but like believable within the continuity of the franchise. Like if she suddenly says, "Oh yes, the Force can allow me to create water out of nothing and stuff like that," people would be like, "Well, that's not how the Force works. That's
Yeah,
ridiculous."
that's Avatar.
Um, yeah, that's yeah. Whereas, like, if they were like, "Oh yeah, the Force can allow her to connect with and talk to Kylo Ren. Like that's built off of maybe not a precedent, but like you can say think like, oh well, the force is connected, everything's connected, so it makes sense that they'd be able to sense each other, or use that whole like, oh, I can sense this person's death or that they're in trouble thing, and maybe solidify that connection to actually communicate with someone. So there's a precedent for it almost. It's not taking anything new, and I think that's what people are looking for is not quite the Force Awakens where it's like, oh yeah, there's this thing that's basically the same as the other movies, but not quite like out there and outlandish. And this is not a thing that can happen within the scope of the series, kind of thing. Um, which thankfully we haven't seen like anything that like really blatantly says like, oh wow, this just breaks the movie for me, kind of thing. But hopefully we continue to avoid stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like overall in The Last Jedi, the closest that we got to that was that whole controversy around the hyperspace attack. But at the end of the movie, like that was kind of an FU to like the science of the series, and like it just opened up a bunch of plot holes. But like as I said earlier, you have to stray the line between what fans are going to accept, and you have to be original somehow, especially after the criticisms for The Force Awakens. Obviously, everyone loved it for being so close to A New Hope, but everyone would have hated The Last Jedi if it just did that again. And that obviously wouldn't have been acceptable. And in a lot of ways, it seemed like the fans were really enjoyed a lot of the more risky elements of the series, obviously. Just bringing a lot more humor into the series overall, the much higher, the what am I trying to say? The greater significance given to female leads in the movie, Leia being having a pivotal role. The rebel leader, I don't remember her name, but like the admiral, whatever her name is, commanding the fleet diligently and just being a strong, empowered figure. I know there was a bunch of feminist cries going out after that, being like, "Oh, you're trying to shove it down our throat, Disney, and whatnot." But obviously, that's just hasty reactions, and over time, nobody's really going to care.
See, I didn't feel like The Last Jedi was kind of forced. I thought that the way that the female characters were put in was just very natural and everything.
Yeah.
Um, the only thing that I didn't like was the fact that the one important Asian character in the movie just has a random force symbol that's literally just the yin and yang, and I felt that that was very just like culturally appropriative almost. Like I was like, okay, so there's one Asian person in the entire film series, right? Other than that blind guy
Yeah.
in Rogue One,
It was much
and
better.
he's some there. She's some like she has some kind of yin yang symbol. Like, come on, like you couldn't have thought of like any way to just include that character without relating it to like like Chinese or Japanese culture or anything like that. Like I thought that was silly.
Yeah, it's just lazy.
Yeah, really, it is. But the Rogue One, there were a few things that I had issue with Rogue One. I liked Rogue One because it felt more like Star Wars, but at the same time, it didn't because the score was lazy. Like the musical
Yes.
score was boring. They had a lot of opportunity. Like they just for some so the story with the reason why the score was very lackluster was because apparently Disney waited until 2 weeks before the launch day to tell the composer that he had to like they literally gave him 2 weeks to work on the entire thing, not only
What?
compose the sheet music but also like record it.
That's
um
absurd.
yeah, it's ridiculous. um
It's also
and also
unprofessional. Like you don't
yeah,
expect that from Disney.
yeah, it was, and they'd known for a long time that John Williams had said he was not going to compose the score for Rogue One because he wanted to focus on The Last Jedi. So they had ample time. Not only that, but if they were going for a Star Wars, like a classic Star Warsy feel, they could have used like the old scores. You know what I mean? Like they, it's not like there's like a copyright on that John Williams said like, oh no, you're not allowed to use those because they're for Star Wars. You know?
Yeah, and I
Um,
feel like they just wanted to have some new music to separate the movie better from the rest of the series. And I would imagine behind the scenes they had like some fallout with whoever was originally composing it, because that just sounds too ridiculous that they would only give the guy 2 weeks. But yeah, it's still you have to go into it with a better plan than that.
Plus, they for some reason he decided he wasn't going like it would have been fine if he had used some of the motifs from the series in conjunction with his new style. That would have been fine. But he really drops the bar where like Darth Vader has this awesome entrance and then it's just like generic orchestral music instead of his theme, and just that moment for me was kind of ruined because I'm big on musical themes in movies and all that. Um, and I feel like they kind of dropped the ball. I actually watched a like supercut of the series of the movie where people had taken the movie and put old Star Wars music over it, and it's 10 times better. Like the scene where they have the Hammerhead Corvette ram into the Star Destroyer to destroy the Shield Gate.
Yeah.
Um, they replaced that with like the X-wing attack scene and everything like that. The score that plays that during that period, and it's just way better. I felt like they really dropped the ball with the music on that movie.
Yeah, and that was really one of the only real criticisms I was hearing about Rogue One. It seemed like overall they did a great job with the plot. The characters were fantastic. It seems like I haven't seen a Star Wars movie in quite a long time that's done a better job developing characters and just having strong ones. Like the robot was awesome. The female lead was great. The obviously the other Asian guy was pretty good. Again, I don't remember any of these guys' names, but yeah,
Yeah.
like I thought they did a really good job. Great ending scene with Darth Vader. You had to throw that in. Probably should have gone with the music as you said, but that's why we
Hmm.
get supercuts, I guess. And yeah, I've always been meaning to watch the some of the supercuts that fans have done for the what is it the
The music.
prequel series
Oh.
because like I've seen despecialized editions for that floating around on the internet, and I've never really gotten the time to check those out. So I should probably see those at some point because I imagine they would do the same service that the Rogue One music did for you.
Yeah, the only issue that I had with the only other issue I had with Rogue One is that the lead felt like she was just Rey, but at a different time. Like my mother actually, when watching it, and quite a few people who have watched it said that at first they were confused because they thought they were watching The Force Awakens, and they were like, "I thought I had paid to see Rogue One," and then they were like, "Oh, that's not Rey, but she looks like her." And she kind of acts like her. I thought the lead was kind of generic, to be honest, like the classic, like I am a woman's woman and I don't need no, I don't take any sass and I'm strong and independent, but also emotional and that's okay kind of thing. And I feel like they could have gone with like a different style. Um, like they could have maybe had her be a little more like showy and tough, like rather than being. She felt like a copy and paste Ray to me, really.
Yeah, and that's understandable, and really that's something I go through for almost every movie I watch, and it's a big reason why I don't watch movies. It's just every hero feels like that for me. It's just so obvious seeing the hero's journey, and like obviously now they're going for female leads in a lot of movies, but unfortunately they're not being creative in how they're bringing them up or like the character development they go through. So like even more so than in other movies, it's becoming too predictable. And yeah, as you said, like it's just like pushing away all the other men in it to bring her up. And so, another thing that I just remembered, another criticism of Rogue One, I always listen to the Hello Internet reviews of the Star Wars movies, and that's my main source for how I form my opinion on how they went. And one of their big criticisms was they felt like the rebels weren't a sympathetic figure within the movie, and that the movie wanted you to look at them as one. Like it seemed like just based on how the movie was portraying it, the rebels were either super cruel, which you would see in the like the actual terrorist forms of it, or
Yeah,
like the
the guy with the weird like
yeah
distorter thing.
the general. I can't remember his name obviously, but
Saw
uh,
Gerrera.
yeah, Saul Guerrero. Yes, I was thinking Nar Shaddaa. That's a planet. But no, like that. Obviously, they weren't sympathetic, and then like a bunch of the rebels, like the actual leads in the series, they were just killing people off like no tomorrow, and then like the rest of the crew wasn't doing too much. But I mean, crap. What's the female lead's name?
Oh, I don't even know. I just call her Ray because that's who
Yeah,
she seems like.
yeah. Ray Light. She was obviously she was not too sympathetic either interactions, and like I'm fine if the movie wants to have and do like an anti-hero thing, and I think that'd be really cool for Disney because they don't usually do that where like you don't know who to root for and you're like, oh, here's the Empire, they look evil, here's the rebels, they also look evil. And obviously it didn't necessarily work for DC in recent comic book movies where they do that with the heroes, but I feel like Disney isn't wouldn't manhandle it as much, and it'd be a nice turn from the standard good versus evil that we're seeing in the new trilogy.
Yeah, and the only exception that I'd make to what you said was that they did make Deadpool, which was an excellent
Oh yeah,
anti-hero
good
movie.
point.
That movie was great.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking
Um,
about Marvel. Yeah,
yeah, but the yeah the rebels, it was weird. It was like they were like they had a mix of, you had the organized rebels, which were led by the Bon Calamari, obviously,
yeah,
and they already had their cruisers and stuff like that. But then you had like the fringe groups, like Saw Gerrera's group, and it's like, okay, you started this narrative of like different rebel groups have different opinions on how they want to fight the Empire. Like the Mon Calamari are more of like a classical, we're just another, we're like a faction fighting against the Empire in like a standard war format. Whereas Saw Gerrera goes for more of like a terroristy feel almost. But then they just drop it. Like
yeah,
that's it. Like, okay, Saw Gerrera's dead now. Guess that whole idea of like different rebel fringe groups, and then potentially having the idea of them coming together and fighting for the same cause, they just kind of dropped it. Like they just didn't do it when they could have. And the Rebels TV show, um, like they also try to tackle this idea that there was originally like a bunch of fringe groups that all individually started rebellions, and it's part of the canon as well that the Rebel Alliance was originally a bunch of scattered rebellions that then like banded together and they made a coalition called the Alliance for the Restoration of the Republic, and they just kind of gloss over it every opportunity they have to kind of focus on it. um, like in the Rebels TV series, they're going from group to group, um, helping out each individual rebel group as their own like little task force kind of thing. Um, but then they don't, like, the end of the series does not involve um, a coalition at all. Like it's just they just end with the characters and they choose to focus on the characters instead of talking about like, oh yes, um, the rebel groups band together
yeah,
and formally form the Alliance of the Republic, or the Alliance to Restore the Republic. And I feel like that would have been a powerful ending for that series, where that series kind of lacked depth in many ways. I like watching parts of Rebels because of the lore and everything, and I really like the lore building, especially in a space opera format. But the problem with Rebels was that like even more so than Clone Wars, it's really directed towards children. In that the main characters are never in any kind of actual danger. The empires are really lackluster. The main villain is really bumbling and stupid. Just one of those classic, like, we're going to take this great thing and then dub it down for children because children are incapable of understanding basic plot lines and all that.
yeah. And that was something that ultimately kept me away from even giving the Rebels series a shot. I think I watched like the first 10 minutes of the series premiere, and I said, nope, not watching this. Like I just decided it was going to be super immature the entire time. It was going and like I think they set themselves up for failure ultimately with like how they did the artistic style. Like if you would compare it to something like the Clone Wars, where like you had a mature artistic style, like it's very war based, and like you didn't see a ton of fighting in like the first couple episodes, and like it's just you have like these cutesy characters, and obviously you have Ezra who looks very young. He doesn't look battle hardened at all. He just looks like some guy who stumbled into this galaxy wide conflict, which I think was what they were going for, but I think that was not the right thing to go for ultimately. I think that was too much appealing to like some random person who's watching it being like, wow, what would I do if I just stumbled into the Star Wars universe? Like, that's not really what you want to go for. And it seemed like they were trying to push for more mature themes as the series went on. I know they did a bunch of just cutting people's heads off and whatnot, but just throwing those in isn't going to make your series mature. It just makes it one that's trying to be mature, and it just has mature elements occasionally. Obviously, they brought back Darth Maul eventually. I had to kill him off by the end, but that happens, and obviously they experimented with Ahsoka a little bit, but nothing really came of that. And then the series, yeah, as you said, just kind of ended. It seemed like either Disney again didn't give the TV writers enough of a heads up on like, hey, we're gonna end with this series. You guys better prepare to write ahead or whatnot. But yeah, and that's getting really annoying with Disney, where with these TV series they don't have satisfying endings.
Yeah, well, and the Clone Wars was just straight up canceled when Disney
Yes.
bought the Star Wars franchise, literally just because it was on Cartoon Network and they didn't want to continue a competing series. Which is unfortunate because the Clone Wars, even the animation just looked more finished in the Clone Wars. Like the Rebels TV series looks gross.
Yeah, it just took a step
Like
back.
it's the characters are really smooth and like have no like facial features almost. Like there's like little bumps where their noses and stuff like that. The lightsabers look really noodly and gross. Like have you noticed that? Like the lightsabers look disgusting. It looks like they're little like light sticks instead of like laser swords, you know? Um, the Rebel series just looked really unfinished, and like whereas the Clone Wars did an awesome job with backgrounds, and I never really liked the CGI animation style of the Clone Wars, but it was still infinitely better in Clone Wars than it was in Rebels. I thought it was just lazy in Rebels, and that also is part of the and the lightsabers make me feel like sick looking at them. Like they really are really gross. I just thought Rebels really dropped the ball with a lot of things. Um, and also, they have this plot line where there's this guy's home planet that's like in a magical space bubble to protect it from the Empire.
Oh God.
Like it's like you have to like go through a wormhole thing to get through it, and I'm just like, this is not Star Wars. Like this is not a thing. This can't be a thing.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
they just watched that Mortis arc and they're like, you know what? What if we just made a whole other planet that does that, but we try and do Star Trek science and we make a wormhole and we do a bunch of stuff with Malachor 5 and time travel and just like they kind of got in over their heads on that one.
yeah. I thought it did add some interesting things. One, it made shoot, what's his name? The blue guy with the red eyes. What's
Oh,
his
yeah,
name?
Thrawn, Admiral
Yeah,
Thrawn. Yeah,
Thrawn. It made him canon, which, thank God. He is an awesome villain. I don't know if you've seen the expanded universe stuff with him, but he's cool.
yeah. And no, like for me at least, I just don't care what Disney says is canon or not. I just ignore them and say, oh, the EU's canon. Like I just don't care.
I like parts of the EU. I personally think that stuff that's prequels that, Disney and nobody else has touched in a quote unquote canon article, I basically consider that canon. But I consider the the post original trilogy EU stuff is a little, some of it is a little weird for me. Like
Yeah.
I actually prefer to an extent the canon that they've created with the uh the post original trilogy stuff in the new movies. But I still consider the prequel stuff canon from
Yeah,
EU.
and it is an interesting thing trying to separate the post episode 6 EU with what they've now come up with, but for the most part it links up. Like obviously you have some problems where like yeah, Chewbacca gets killed by the Yuzang Vong, obviously, and that doesn't happen in the actual series, but surprisingly, I haven't had too much trouble just saying, oh, this was one interpretation and then this was another, and I can enjoy both. And really,
Oh yeah, like I mean, oh, there's another series that like really plays around with um there are different time. Oh, well, I mean, obviously the Marvel universe and the DC universe. Like, just because, say, the Killing Joke continuum is not the same as the one that they're doing right now, doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. And I
yeah,
like the way that the Marvel universe does it, where they're like, you can take whatever continuum you want and do whatever you want with it. They're just be aware that they're like separate. And I think that would be awesome if Disney was like, hey, go ahead and continue the EU. It's just you have to label it maybe it's like a separate continuum from um, the Disney sponsored, I guess, continuum. I think that would be awesome if they were just like, yeah, this is just like the Marvel universe where there's different timelines and stuff like that. As long as in the context of the series they don't do crossovers, because Marvel does do that where they're like, oh yes, this timeline crosses with this timeline, and
yeah,
let's
that's
see the
weird.
shenanigans that go on with that. But that should not be a thing that happens in the Star Wars universe.
No, that's bizarre, and that's a very much a comic book thing. Luckily, we haven't seen that trickle into the movies at all. But yeah, I mean, who knows? You got a movie coming up called Infinity War. If there's any movie they're gonna squeeze that into, it's there. Not that I expect it, but you know. But no, I absolutely agree, and I don't really understand, to be honest, why Disney was so dead fast on just immediately when they bought out Lucasfilms and LucasArts and whatnot, just immediately declaring all of the EU non-canon and being like, nope, we're starting over, and really making people care about that. Like before, during the normal Star Wars movies, it didn't seem like people cared at all what was canon and what wasn't canon. And it's weird that they tried to set such a precedent where they're like, you should care whether it's canon or not. And it's been very weird to see all these Star Wars fans getting in a whole tizzy and like getting so excited about stuff like Thrawn being canon. Like obviously it's a good thing. You don't want Thrawn to just them to come out and be like, oh, Thrawn never existed. That's no fun, obviously. But yeah, overall, just compared to a lot of the stuff that they're doing in the movies, it just seems kind of insignificant.
Yeah, and I forgot that the using Vong thing doesn't happen now. Well, with at least within the continuum thing. I wonder they should. It would be cool if they brought that up in the main series with the new characters and everything. Maybe that's how their end episode 8 is just everybody dies to them. But
Yeah, because that was the
they
problem. They were too overpowered. But yeah,
well yeah, they were ridiculous. Like yes, we're just gonna not be able to be either detected by or you know um, affected by the Force, and we're just gonna come in with our giant biological warships and
yeah.
destroy the galaxy and all that. Um, but yeah, that would be a fun thing to revisit in maybe like a side movie or something. They were cool enemies. They felt like actual space orcs, even with
Yeah,
their like design, they felt like actual space orcs, which I thought was really cool.
yeah, it's a good comparison, except not brutish and actually having some level of intelligence, even though they were very much like all of the prequel, just not seafaring, I guess spacefaring civilizations like the not the Krell, what is it, the Rakata, where like they're just
Mm-hmm.
going through the entire universe, and like they may not be smart, but they're really good at just conquering everything with their technology and using it through the Force, and obviously just eventually collapsing when the writers realized that, oh crap, we've written ourselves into a corner here. These guys can't be beaten, and that's a big problem that I have in a lot of comic book series, is that like you keep having to up the ante with the villains just over and over again, and like it always comes down to like a villain that where like you have one superhero and then the villain, like the hardest one they face is one that's just not affected by their powers, and it's like, okay, you this is just a BS villain here. Like this thing, I get that it's not realistic to have a superhero in the first place, but it's really not realistic to have a superhero whose powers do not affect this utter supervillain in any way. Like, it just feels
Yeah, and then
silly.
they somehow, by really believing in their superpowers, suddenly the villain is vulnerable to their
Yeah,
superpowers or something.
and like that's their only choice because, as I said, they wrote themselves into a corner.
Yeah. I thought that interestingly, the Last Jedi did a good job of like challenging that trope because you see, you know, the Poe Dameron. He's like, I'm going to lead this valiant sacrificial charge, and it's going to save everybody, but like at what cost, kind of thing. And when the Admiral drive does the whole controversial hyperspace scene, which by the way, regardless of how much sense it makes in the continuum of Star Wars, like that was an awesome
No,
scene.
it was an awesome scene, but yeah,
Um, and it was thematically significant as well because Poe, he's like Leia's like, you've done this thing, like, the whole like, I can't believe you've done this. Um, you've risked yourself for this one plan, and it's screwed up. And now this is the consequences you have to deal with. Um, the basic obliteration of like half their fleet, right? And Holda's sacrifice by destroying the dreadnought and whatnot with the hyperspace collision. Um, and it just throughout the movie, it's challenging this idea that like the rebellion is not three people or four people like Luke, Leia, Han, and whatnot destroying the entire empire. Like there are individual people fighting for the destruction of the First Order and all that. And I really liked that that was a theme that the movie had. That it wasn't just a bunch of heroes saving the entire galaxy. It wasn't about one spark. It was about many. coming together to defeat, the Empire.
Yeah, that is a good point, but I want to get into some of the finer details of the movie because I want to see what you think of some of them. Did you like the character of Rose in the movie?
I did actually. People didn't like the arc, like their story arc, with the whole yeah we're gonna go to some space resort and free some animals. Woo. Um, and in retrospect, like I agree that maybe that was a weird plotline for them to undertake. But also, I feel like Finn did zero character development throughout the Force Awakens. Like he was kind of cowardly a little bit, and I thought that it was important for them to kind of address that, like the whole thing that he's like he tries to run away because he believes that there's no hope and everything, and Rose kind of teaches him a lesson about that. And I think that their arc was also about um, showing, it's not just the big bads, you know, um, feature like sponsoring the empire and everything. It's greed. The companies that both sell to the rebels and the empire their designs. Um, the con guy who breaks them out of jail and everything, and then sells them to the empire because that's the highest bidder. Um, and also the little kid at the end, um, and talking about how like the rebellion isn't just something that exists in a few people; it's something that exists in everyone who's oppressed by the tyranny of the empire. And I think it's important. It was an interesting introspection on how the empire's reign affects the rest of the galaxy, basically. And I did actually like their story arc. And Rose herself was, like I said, I had criticisms about her, just the fact that she's like, oh yes, the one Asian girl who also has the one Asian symbol in the entire series related to her. Um, but I did like her character arc, and I thought that she was an interesting character, and the whole thing where she stops Finn from saving her, that was another important moment I thought for the theme of the movie. That yeah, it's not self-sacrifice is not this glorious thing. Like if you just keep trading one for one with each other, eventually you're gonna lose. Um, which is a theory that is important in everything, like chess. If you just go through the entire game of chess and you know oh yeah, you took my pawn, so I'm going to take your pawn, and here's my queen, I'm going to take your queen. And if you kept doing that, then like eventually, just whoever has more pieces wins. And I think that was another important part of the movie is saying that like self-sacrifice is great and all, but like over glorification of it and making it seem like it's the only answer to everything is just a mistake.
No, definitely, and unfortunately, I didn't really see it the same way with Rose. I felt like it was just Disney kind of portraying all the negative elements of like what older people think like the millennial generation is, and just like her always making like the snide comments and like being too focused on like her affair with Finn and like not the actual events of the movie, and just something like her crashing in like at the end of the movie, her smashing into Finn's spaceship when he's trying to save the day and like is about to have a really emotional moment with the audience, and like that's something that's really needed because as you said, Finn didn't really develop his character at all, and I felt like that was really setting him up to be like a real what do they call it? Like the just a person sacrificing himself for the greater cause, and then she just interrupts it for like a sappy, like oh I saved you, you idiot, and like it just comes off as stupid and like
Well,
it's
I think the whole point of the movie is saying that like you're if you're gonna fight and then like kill yourself in the process of fighting, like what is the point in fighting? She says like how can we say that we're fighting for a good cause if we're not fighting for what we love? And so the idea, I think Finn after his little escapade with Rose on the like the Las Vegas planet,
yeah, which we both
um,
agree was terrible.
it I did not have an issue with it, but then again, I didn't have a huge issue with Jar Jar either. So I guess I have a large amount
Yeah,
of tolerance for these kinds of things. I thought it was it's one of those things where it's like okay, yeah, it was good because I'm used to a like it was a good scene for like a movie, but I guess not for a Star Wars movie. I will agree that for a Star Wars movie, it was maybe not the most prudent idea for a scene, but I didn't personally have an issue with it. But Yeah, I think after that he's left feeling very nihilistic and everything. Like he's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna sacrifice myself for the rebellion because I was a coward and now I'm not gonna be a coward. And she's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about being not being cowardly. Being brave does not mean killing yourself for a cause. Um, and I think it ties into one of the biggest themes of the movie, and that there's a lot of really Buddhist tones to the movie.
Yeah,
I don't know, if, like there are literal direct comparisons. Luke gaining enlightenment under the tree, the burning tree, um, the whole idea that like the force is not about a light or a dark; it's about the balance in between them. That whole thing. Um, and I think that's part of it is that it's like it's again that walking that fine line between complete self-sacrifice and what Buddhists call self-mutilation or self-mortification, um, and greed. And I think Finn's whole storyline, where he's like, at first he's going to abandon the rebellion, that's him being, selfish. And then when Rose stops him from killing himself for the rebellion, she's like, that's the other side of it is too much selflessness, destroys yourself and the purpose of your cause and everything.
yeah. I would probably have to rewatch the scene to be honest to like see how the movie plays it up and if like my perception of how the scene should have gone would really be worthwhile. Because honestly, it's just been a while since truthfully, I haven't actually seen the movie, but so
Yeah,
that's a lot of the Last Jedi for you. Did you like the continuing of a trend in a lot of Disney movies and just movies in general right now, where like action scenes are immediately toned down by just thrown in jokes,
I didn't feel like there was much of that in Last Jedi.
and like just one of the big things I was thinking about is the basically the first scene in the movie where Luke is getting the Luke is okay, so Ray is handing the lightsaber to Luke, and then Luke just like blatantly throws it over his shoulder like he doesn't even care about it. Like I just felt like that was a he like you if you watch the scene, he almost has like a wry smile when he does it, like he knows that he's being like super coy about it, and like I felt like it was just them not really taking the scene seriously, which feels dumb because you literally had it as a cliffhanger from your previous movie. It should be taken very seriously, and
I Go ahead.
and like I was just gonna say, it follows up on like something that really pushed me away from Marvel movies was when I watched the Avengers 2, the initial scene where like they're doing the assault on uh, the compound or whatever it is. Like the entire battle scene, which is a fantastic battle scene, it's ruined by the fact that like the entire time they're just throwing out jokes and like they're being like, "Hey, look at you, Mr. Hulk, what are you doing?" And like it just they're just screwing around the entire time. And it ruins the tension, and like like they're not. It shows you immediately. Oh, they're not gonna throw in a deaf ear. Like they're making jokes the entire time. They wouldn't do that, and like it's yeah. I just feel like it ruins the mood, and it's not a smart choice.
Yeah, I think the scene that you're specifically talking about with Luke, I feel like the whole point of the movie was breaking people's perception of how things were going to go, because I
Yeah,
think that particular director was like,
I would 100% agree. Yeah, Ryan
yeah,
Johnson.
that particular director was like, okay, people have made these theories. I know they're going to hate when we don't fulfill these theories, so we're gonna rip off the bandage now, um, and kind of like one fell swoop. And that's just the opening to the movie. And I think Mark Hamill actually commented on that scene, and he was like, that was that he said that was kind of like um, he didn't criticize the scene. He was like, oh yeah, well, it broke the tension, but in a way that was very Luke, is what he said. Mark Hamill is very passionate about the character and everything, and he said that he wasn't necessarily too happy with the way that like Luke was very dejected and everything, and stayed that way kind of through the whole movie. But I think it was very fitting. I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with the person who plays him, um, and say that Luke was going through this, midlife crisis basically, where he was like, I've tried to teach the way of the Jedi, and maybe the way of the Jedi isn't the way that the Jedi is supposed to be. And that's the whole theme of The Last Jedi, is that walking either the complete light or the complete darkness is dangerous because it creates discord, and the whole point is that you have to maintain a balance. And I think Luke is having to come to terms with that because he grew up being taught by Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's still very much you have to follow the light side, and Luke for at least the beginning of the movie was still like that, but at the end I think when he reaches his sort of Buddhist moment and becomes one with the Force, I think that's when he realizes that you have to have a balance. It can't be light or dark.
And I would definitely agree with that. It does very much follow the path of Luke trying to come to grips with how his basically his entire teaching and just the philosophy he lives by falls apart around him, and him trying to cope with it and ultimately failing by the end of the movie. But like that's a strong choice, and yeah, I would agree with Mark Hamill that while it did feel like something Luke would do, it also really didn't because. Like just in the original trilogy, Luke wasn't somebody that just ignores the moment and like I don't know, when he walks in on Vader cremating or not cremating, doing the whole carbonation process with Han Solo. He doesn't walk in and crack a joke and be like, "Oh, is it hot in here, or is it just me?" And like, and that's not what Luke does. Like he takes the moment seriously, and I mean he works through it like a standard hero. And in this movie, it just felt like Brian Johnson, the director, really pushed way too hard to go against what everyone was expecting and almost trying to outthink the audience. And at
I
some
definitely got that feel as well.
and like at some points, that's not the smartest thing. Like you're not playing a chess match with the audience. You're trying to make a good movie, and I felt like at some points the movie suffered because he was trying to surprise them and go against what maybe made the most sense by something like Occam's Razor.
Yeah, I agree that there were definitely parts of this movie that were very screw you. I'm not very happy with the way they handled Snoke.
Yeah,
I feel like
I was gonna ask you.
be, beyond any anger that Rian Johnson had over the fans, um, that was something that just for the integrity of the movie needed to be resolved. Sure, kill him off, but like give him better backstory first. Like maybe have a little like even just a villain monologue about like some just something. There needed to be some kind of like who is he? We don't even know what species he is. Like there's just no like it would have been cool if they tied him to Thrawn and the what is the like empire that Thrawn is.
The Chiss Ascendancy.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if they tied him to that maybe, or just something. Just there needed to be something like he's not even a Sith Lord apparently, like because he was just someone who was very force sensitive. Um, he was apparently not a Sith Lord either, and I wanted to know more about like why is he so attuned with the dark side? Who is he? What does he want? Does he want a return of the Sith Empire? Is he like anti-Sith or something? Who knows? We just got nothing on him.
Yeah, and I just felt like they were very flippant with him, and it was very much so just trying to pull the rug out from under the audience and being like, "Oh, you remember this guy you've been making theories about for 2 years and have been getting super excited to find out more about? Well, he's gone," and like that's not good with film writing. And you don't make the audience invest in a character for 2 years and feed them absolutely nothing on him and then just get rid of him. Like then you just wasted our time. And I feel like it just ruins the Force Awakens main villain, and it's just like, okay, there's Snoke, he's gonna die in the next movie, and we're not gonna learn anything about him. And yeah, it's something that was alluded to throughout the build up to the movie and EU coverage. Well, I guess it wouldn't really be EU. I guess it would be canon books. But in the Thrawn novels, something that was always talked about was the threat from the unknown regions and just we have to partner with the Empire to prevent the threat from the unknown regions from conquering the entire galaxy. And just I think that would have been fantastic if they linked it to Snoke, and like he was somebody that was not only working against the rebellion, but he was also working against Kylo Ren at the same time, and that's what pushed him towards working with Rey to really take him down. But they did not handle it well at all. They fed us absolutely nothing on him, and like yeah, I would have even taken like an evil villain monologue, even though that's so far out of what Star Wars does, just so we could get anything on him. And like I don't know if they're gonna delve into a book on him or something. I doubt it at this point. It seems like they just want to throw him away. But
I
I
think if I think if they give literally anyone else the opportunity, I think literally only Rian Johnson was satisfied with just killing him off. And I think that somebody at some point is going to make a canonical explanation of who he is and what he was doing.
Yeah, or just like say, just kidding, he didn't actually die, or something, because it's just it didn't make any sense, and it was just completely trying to surprise the audience, and it wasn't worth it. Like I haven't seen anyone who was like, that was a strong choice, Ryan Johnson, good job.
Yeah, people are speculating though that like that was very abrupt, and maybe the next director is going to be like, "Surprise, he's not dead," because of we. I mean, there's precedent in the Star Wars series for people coming back from the dead,
I mean, yeah,
after being cut in half. Like Darth Maul is the whole Darth Maul coming back thing is canon, whether you like that or not. And I actually liked Darth Maul's like narrative. I thought his whole story arc was very cool. I don't know if you know the whole like his whole entire story, but
yeah,
basically he after his because people one big criticism people had was that like Darth Maul was this awesome dude and they just kind of like, oh, he's cut in half,
yeah.
bye.
I mean,
Well,
I know everything up until Rebels.
well, after they kind of leave it open ended at the end of the Clone Wars. The
Yeah,
Darth Sidious takes him back. It seems. Apparently, Darth Sidious tortures him for information about where the Night Sisters are, and then uses that information to destroy them. Um, the Night Sisters being like the weird
yes,
witch force people, but he comes back eventually, breaks free from his master, and he goes hunting for Obi-Wan because he has this obsession with destroying Obi-Wan. And Ezra actually winds up allying with him for a short time, and he knows that like Darth Maul really hates. He knows that he's a Sith Lord, but it's kind of used as like a he become like Darth Maul actually calls him his Padawan, um, because like the whole thing is that Ezra's taking this little delve into the dark side to see what it's all about. Um, and ultimately he rejects that, of course, because he's the main character. And Darth Maul and Obi-Wan have a final confrontation. And it's actually a really powerful moment because Darth Maul tries to do the head bash move that kills Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan's ready for it, and then literally a second, he kills Darth Maul. Like it's as soon as the duel starts, it's over because Darth Maul tries to use a technique that Obi-Wan saw him use to kill Qui-Gon. And as Darth Maul is dying, he's saying, Obi-Wan calls him his brother or something like that. And it's a really powerful scene because it's like it's relating to that whole thing that's like they're two sides of the same coin almost. They're both, you know, followers of the ways of the Force, just on different parts. Um, and it's just this really emotional moment where someone who Obi-Wan, by all intents and purposes, should have hated for killing his master, he just kind of like holds him as he dies by his hand, actually. And it's just this very interesting culmination of Darth Maul's whole story arc, um, that I thought was really that Rebels does have its moments, but only moments, and
yeah,
that was one of them.
yeah. And I think overall they had a lot of strong plot elements that they were working with, but either by execution or just the different settings that they were put in, or just the surrounding atmosphere. I feel like they were wasted on this series, and that's a shame. And it's interesting that the fans and critics alike were so okay with Darth Maul sticking around for as long as he did, because you would think at some point he would have to have gotten killed off before then, but it just seemed to work for some reason, just because nobody ever had a reason to kill him off.
Yeah, and going back to the whole point that I brought him up, he gets cut in half and falls down a chute, and survives. So people are like, maybe, there's some kind of dark force juju that is going to make Snoke return and be like, "You fools! How could you think that such a simple trick would fool me?" kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, where he comes back and
but that almost
does
feels like
some.
a bigger mistake at this point.
Yeah, it might be, but at the same time, I would not be. Because he did just kind of get cut in half, and people have survived that, and we don't know what species he is, so maybe all of his vital organs are, above his legs.
Yeah,
We just don't know. So I would not be surprised to see him make a comeback. Um, I think it would be kind of weird though if he was defeated in the same way. Like, if he does make a comeback, he needs to be it needs to be some kind of metaphysical kind of like he's not just some physical being that can be, oh yeah, we're just gonna chop off his arm and he's dead now, kind of thing. There needs to be some kind of like maybe even a moment where the only way to defeat him is for Kylo Ren and Ray to finally come together and bring together the two sides of the Force. Um, but I think in general, it's I would not be opposed to him making a return and for there to be more backstory on that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where Disney goes with it, but my best guess is it's just a dead end now, and that's all
Yeah,
thanks to Ryan Johnson. But yeah, overall, I think The Last Jedi, it's a solid Star Wars movie, but I think the biggest problem with it is it's lowered fans' expectations of what the series is and can do, and that's not a good thing. And
no, it's not.
and that'll be interesting to see how that goes into the conclusion of this trilogy, because I think overall people are either overlooking the Han Solo movie or just whatever. But we're not going to. So, are you excited at all for the Han Solo movie?
To be honest, I wasn't even like I don't get like excited for many movies right now. I'm actually really excited to see The Incredibles 2 and stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um, yeah, I don't get excited, especially since they're coming out once a year now. What I'm excited for is the potential Boba Fett movie. That I'm actually excited for, and I really hope they go with that. But the Han Solo movie, part of the people were very hyped up by the trailer, but I also was a little bit annoyed. Well, I'm gonna put my judgment on that out for now because they're using rock music for the Han Solo movie. Like there's electric guitar elements in the
Yeah.
music, and I don't know how I feel about that. So we're just gonna have to wait and see how they handle that. But to be honest, if they play it right, it could work. But especially since John Williams is still working on the score, I guess Disney realized their mistake with that in Rogue One. But I am not necessarily even apprehensive about it. I'm just gonna go see it when it comes out. Is kind of just the opinion that I have right now.
Yeah, for me, I really didn't want them to make this movie. I wanted them to take the fact that they have these spin-off series, like it's not really a spin-off series, it's just like a cutaway movie, really, and use it to push away from all of the original trilogy lore and characters and get some new characters involved and get a new setting involved. And I feel like they're not letting these characters go, and I get that they're trying to hang on to them at least until this whatever you call it, the new trilogy, I guess, is done. But I mean, I'm long since done with these characters, and I was yeah, me too. I was really excited for the Boba Fett movie, and like that's something that I always really enjoyed was reading the some of the Boba Fett books. Those are some of the only books I've actually read in the Star Wars EU. The most other ones I either just read a plot summary of, or I don't know, listen to an audiobook, I guess. But I know those are fantastic books, and they have a ton to draw from. But unfortunately, a lot of the older fans they don't have any either appreciation or desire to see a Boba Fett movie because they think he's just a weak character because of his performance in Episode 6, where he's always being played up and like it's always the scariest bounty hunter in the universe, and oh, he can kill anybody, and then he just immediately gets thrown into the Sarlacc, and it's like, okay, what was that build up for? We didn't see any of the payoff. But no, definitely in the extended universe, you get to see that, and he's a really cool character, and it's really going to come down to how they play this Han Solo character, and like how much new information comes out, how much EU gets brought back in. Because if they do a good job of bringing in new stuff on him, then it could be interesting to see how they do the Boba Fett movie.
Yeah. And there's to be honest, there was a Clone Wars arc with young Boba Fett, and that was awful. Like it's this like kid leading a band of bounty hunters that are like all way older than him and way cooler than him. And he's just this whiny kid at the middle of it. And he kills Cad Bane. And Cad Bane is like the coolest bounty hunter in the Clone Wars saga. Like even in the prequel, like even Jango Fett doesn't hold a candle to Cad Bane. Cad Bane is a really really cool character. He's like the Western gunslinger of the Star Wars universe, and like Boba Fett, young whiny Boba Fett kills him off.
Yeah.
And really feel like young Boba Fett did not do Boba Fett as a character any kind of justice.
I don't know. I think Obi-Wan the bounty hunter was actually the best bounty hunter in the series, but that might just be me.
Well, what?
Yeah,
When
Obi-Wan the bounty hunter.
when did this happen?
From the box series where like Obi-Wan's trying to infiltrate the assassination plot to kill the Chancellor, and like he fakes his
Oh
own death.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, that was a that was such a weird like. Oh my god.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I remember that part. The Clone Wars had such a diverse was such a diverse series. I really liked the Clone Wars.
No, honestly, and this is something I was going to get into. Do you have anything else to say on the Han Solo movie?
No, not really.
Great, then we can just talk about the Clone Wars for a little bit. So here, let me just lay out my feelings to start out with on the Clone Wars series. So I think it can best be summarized by, if I had to take all of the Star Wars movies and or the Clone Wars series and like only see one ever, I'd take the Clone Wars series.
Yeah, I agree. Someone on Reddit put it very well. Clone Wars was what the prequels should have been.
Yes.
They handled Anakin's descent into the dark side
Oh,
better than the
amazing.
prequels did. They handled the Clone Wars itself better than the prequels did. They handled like character development and everything better than the prequels did. They handled lore better. They had like Jar Jar was not present for most of it
And
and
he
was
was
less
cool.
irritating in the Clone Wars series.
And he was
Like
good in like the ones he was
they
in.
they just do it better. Like it's just so much better than the prequels. And I don't even have a huge problem with the prequels because I was young when I watched them and I didn't have a
Yeah, me either.
terribly huge issue. But the Clone Wars was just objectively better than them.
No, and like that, I honestly struggle to find any problems with the Clone Wars. Maybe you can say that they were still trying to grow into what they really were in the first season, and like the animation style was honestly just terrible in the first season. But for the most part, you see that in almost any TV series where the first season is going to suck, and then they grow into what they really are. And that was the biggest shame with the Clone Wars series, was it just kept getting better and better and better and better, and then it gets canceled, and it was a real shame because it just everything was great about the series. Like, first of all, I think that whole setup where you have like 3 to 4 episode arcs that are telling a story, I think that was a fantastic choice because
Mm-hmm.
it essentially makes for just like a little shorter than run length movies where you have like either an hour and a half or like an hour 45 of just a story being told through TV episodes. I think that was a really strong choice. I love the animation style from season 2 onward. I'm just a really big fan of it for some reason, and obviously it's a big factor that I grew up on the Clone Wars series. But you know, and the battles, I thought the battles were the best in the entire series, better than I've seen in the new trilogy. I just think they're fantastic.
Yeah,
The
because people die.
Yeah, like
Like
they actually die, and like the stakes are real. And like one of the biggest things is that immediately when it's set up, like when the series is created, you know who's gonna live, so you don't even have to think about it. You're like, okay, I'm going in with this expectation. It's not even like they're gonna try and tease me with, oh, is Anakin gonna die? Because they know you know that he's not gonna die, and like that's not the point of the series. It's to see, ooh, is Ahsoka gonna die, or ooh, is Captain Rex finally gonna meet his match, or ooh, who's the next Jedi who's gonna die in the series? And like just everyone is the stakes are real, and like all every episode practically you're seeing like a Jedi go down, or you're seeing like a big bounty hunter go down, or you're seeing like some not separatist, just Empire leader, or like you see the Mandalorian leader go down in the Darth Maul series, and then like Darth Maul coming back, fantastic choice, and then like Savage Opress eventually dying. Like just the stakes are real, and that's something that so many series lose out on, and this did a fantastic job of it.
yeah, and just every episode feels like a masterpiece. Like let's talk for a second about when Savage Opress is killed.
Oh yeah.
Darth Maul goes to directly challenge them, and Maul's like, "Oh, it's my master. I'll be subservient." He's like, "No, you're not my ally. You're my rival." And then he like laughs at them, like he's basically just playing with them. And one of the things that is discussed in a lot of biographies about Palpatine is that he loves being in the action. He feels like if his life is not at risk, he's not living, and that's part of the reason why he goes to the Battle of Endor, because he wants to see for himself the destruction of the Rebel Alliance. He wants to feel that victory because he can't really go and do things anymore because he's this big emperor person and he can't actually physically risk himself. And this scene where he goes and he's like, I'm going to kill this guy and torture this guy and it's going to be fun. Like he's laughing as he plays. Like
Yeah.
he basically just plays with them. Like they don't have a chance against him. The whole battle is them losing ground to this old, you know, senator basically. And I thought that particular scene was excellent.
Oh yeah. And would you agree that number one character in the entire Clone Wars series would be the Chancellor?
You don't really get enough. I think Chancellor. I think he's faithful to his character, but honestly, my favorite character. I don't even know. I really like the
Because it's
individual
hard.
clone characters. Like the whole idea of giving them personality and everything. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, like just especially as the series progressed, where like you have the cadets that you're following throughout the series. You start with the Rishi Moon episode, and then you go to flashing back for the season premiere of season three, where you're getting to see them on Camino getting trained, and you get a ton of backstory. And like I was watching that episode like the other day, and not the other day, like 3 months ago, but I couldn't believe how densely packed it was, and like how much you get to see these characters, and like you get an understanding of where these guys are coming from, and then like they just keep following the same characters throughout the series, and like it's not something that like happens every episode, but like every season you can expect, okay, we're gonna see Echo, we're gonna see Fives, we're gonna see how they're checking in, we're gonna see how they're relating with Captain Rex, we're gonna see Echo like progress into like a character that knows more than about what's going on within the galaxy than anyone else in the entire series, and like by the lost episodes, he becomes just an amazing character, and like unfortunately, it was a premise that everyone knew how it was going to go, but I mean, it was yeah,
Yeah, the and I don't know if you've they had almost the entirety of the season finale, like the series finale, completed, and so online you can watch the full like I mean they're in awful like rendering, like they're not completed at all, but the dialogue and everything is there, um, and they work as if the end of that series is canon. Like the things that happen at the end of that series, even though they weren't official, like they weren't released, are canon in the continuum. Um, and they what happens is a bunch of the clones are our hero clones are say like the ones that we follow the rookies. One of them finds out about the Order 66, and they there's a whole arc where they're basically telling the Kaminoans to go f themselves. I'm not gonna let this be because they have a real loyalty to the Jedi, and so the rookies are like, um, you know, we're not going to let this happen, and so that's how in the that's how in Rebels you have some clones who are left over because they get the chips removed from them and they are no longer bound to Order 66 or any of that.
yeah. Within the entire series, is something I was trying to figure out when. So I never mentioned this to you actually, but I tried to last year do a like complete review of the entire Clone Wars series and like do it episode by episode and just write down everything that like I thought of and like try and rank every single episode within the series. And after like 40 pages in, I only got through like 8 episodes, so I had to abandon that because it was becoming way too taxing in terms of time. It literally it took like 2.5 hours to do one episode, and that was ridiculous. But
Yeah.
I obviously never got to figure out what my favorite series and episodes were within the entire Clone Wars saga. Did you have a favorite arc or like a top three arcs within the series? Because there's a ton of fantastic ones.
Two of the ones that stand out to me because I haven't seen it in a long time. I did like the Malevolence arc because I like super weapons. I love the super weapons in the Star Wars saga. I think the bigger the better. And I think the whole Malevolence arc, where they have an ion cannon that basically just wipes out entire fleets with one fell swoop, and then they activate the hyperdrive, and they have the whole thing where you can't activate hyperdrives in gravity wells because it rips the ship apart, and they blow it up on the moon and everything. I thought that was really really cool. I liked the Malevolence arc a lot. Plus, you have like Plo Koon, and one thing that the Star Wars saga did well is taking characters that had either no or little to no speaking lines in the original trilogy and giving them fleshed out backstories and characters. And Plo Koon is one of those people. And he's basically he's in this arc and then like one or two others, and that's it. Um, and I still really liked his character in the Malevolence arc. And then the second one that I liked was the one with Krell, the four-armed Jedi who turns evil and betrays the clones. I thought that was a very cool arc as well, just because he was such an evil villain, and the clones are like, he's like, you guys are programmed, you can't kill me, and then the guy just shoots him, like he's just like, bop, and that's it. And they're like, you know, it's another one of those arcs that gives a lot of humanity to the clones. Like they're not like droids where you can just throw as many droids as you want at them at people and not worry about it. Although people debate, and that's another interesting topic discussion. These like consciousness of droids and stuff like that, but that's a whole other topic. What were your favorite arcs in Clone Wars?
Yeah, so for me, I had a lot of favorites, honestly. I'll just highlight all of them and then go through like a top three, I guess. So starting off at the beginning of the series, I agree the Malevolence arc is really stands out among a bunch of kind of boring arcs to start off the series. Like it was just building up what the Clone Wars really was. So like they had the fantastic one with the Malevolence, and it was really good. It had a lot of parallels to the original trilogy, unfortunately, but it seemed like it was really good overall. You got a ton of fantastic character building, and like it was a brief intermission in what I was in my notes describing as Ahsoka's bitchy phase, where like she was just,
Oh yeah,
and like
and
that was a
that's why that arc is so good, because she's not in it at the start.
yeah, and like it was a really big problem during the first season that like she was just not an enjoyable character in any way, and like she was just annoying, and like it was the biggest problem in the movie, the Clone Wars, and where she was just chewing Anakin out the entire time, and like she wasn't an enjoyable character, and like it made it seem unrealistic that like Anakin was bonding to her so much. It's like why are you bonding to this character you didn't even want if she's just chewing you out the entire time and just not being a fun person to be around. But that was a great break from that. And immediately after it ends, you go into like the worst arc in the series, which was that the R2 is missing thing where
Oh my
it,
god,
that
yeah.
was so bad.
And
Where
they
like
have like the battle with where they have like the R2D2 battle
yeah,
thing,
it was
like where
horrendous.
R2D2's they have like a scar, save me brother thing, and it's like it's R2D2. Like, come on.
Yeah, and like that, it just made Ahsoka the worst that she was in the entire series. Where like she's spending the entire time patronizing Anakin and being like, "You're a terrible person for making fun of this black R2 droid. You should be more sympathetic." And then like, she's proven wrong. So it's like, okay, were you guys trying to write her into a bad situation? That didn't make any sense. But just going into a series I really enjoyed. I'm a really big fan of the Lofo Minor series where they're sorry, not Lofo Minor, Lola Seiyu, where they're on the prison planet and they're infiltrating to try and rescue Evan Peel, who ultimately dies before they can make it off the planet. I felt like it was one of the strongest free episode arcs. It was just so densely packed. It was full of action the entire time. Throughout it's tense because there's so many characters. Any of them can die at any point. Like the stakes are real throughout. As a fantastic villain and the foreman of the prison. He was just so cool. You had Fives dying, which really it just reminded you that okay, these ARC troopers can die. We got to take that seriously. You had Ahsoka sneaking on, so that was great for plot development and character development. So I'm a really big fan of that one. I'm a really big fan of the Mortis series as well. That was fantastic for Anakin. It really it combined what was in the original trilogy and like the stuff that he was going through in that, obviously being Darth Vader, with the conflicts that was going on in the prequels and really begins to tie those two together with, and where you can watch episode 3, the movie, and say, okay, now I can begin to understand how he was really beginning to fall and like why he was going through these character struggles, why his relationship with Padme was suffering, why he would eventually turn to the dark side, and like it made sense suddenly. So that was really cool. I'm a huge fan as well of the Umbara arc. That was fantastic. Single-handedly the best clone arc, and
That was
it,
with Yoda, right?
no, it's where they're challenging Pong Krell. So like
Right,
the
right, right. That's
yeah,
the one I was talking about. Yeah.
yeah, so that was a really good arc, and I feel like there was a good. Oh yeah, the Darth Maul arc in season
hmm
5. That was absolutely fantastic. And aside
It
from
had a it had a bit of a rocky beginning, that one, because you were like, oh, it's Darth Maul and he's kind of crazy, but then when he gets his sanity back, it's excellent.
oh, not that one. I'm talking about the one where he's going to Mandalore and like actually taking over
Oh,
the
okay.
planet.
So you're talking about the one where, like, not his entire arc. You're
No,
talking about,
just
yeah.
that
Okay.
last one, yeah.
Yeah.
And like it
Yeah.
had obviously had a fantastic ending. And then
hmm
those with all the arcs, and then I'll just highlight that very last battle in the series was absolutely incredible. Where it's Yoda and Anakin versus Darth Sidious. That was unbelievable.
I don't remember that. Maybe I didn't quite catch the end of the
Yeah,
series. I
it
might
was
have to
the
go back and rewatch it.
yeah, it was like the very last episode, and that entire Yoda arc was really strong. But like I wasn't crazy about
Oh
it.
no, I've seen parts of that arc, I think. The where Yoda sees Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon leads him to like his answers and everything, and then
Yes,
Yoda has to battle Darth Sidious, but they don't know who he is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like overall, I didn't like most of the middle of the arc. I just thought it was kind of boring. Amazing start to it with Plo Koon going and tracking down Sifo-Dyas's down ship, and then amazing ending. The boring middle was kind of boring, but But overall, I'd probably have to say that that prison arc is my favorite. I'm just a really big fan of that one, and then probably the Umbar arc, and then the Darth Maul one. Like that prison arc is huge for the character development, and
Mm.
it's just so tense throughout. And I think they do such an amazing job with it.
Oh, and two others that deserve mention. Um, maybe not necessarily because of their significance or anything, but just because they're awesome. The Zillo Beast arc. I thought that one
Yeah,
was really cool because you got a good introspection on Palpatine. And I thought it was interesting that like the Zillo Beast could tell that he was a Sith Lord and was actively trying to kill him. And you see a lot of Palpatine. You see Palpatine's underlying like ruthlessness. Like he's like he almost knows that the Beast knows who he is, and he's always like kill it.
that's actually the
Um,
exact reason I don't like that arc. That's
really?
interesting. Yeah, I just felt like it's BS, but like, just how
Oh,
on earth do you know that he's evil? That's ridiculous, and I just
mm.
felt it was silly throughout. But to each their own.
And just for the shock value, the second Geonosian arc.
Oh yeah, that one was brutal.
Yeah, that was like that was the arc that said we're not pulling out any, this crap's for kids only because there's no cussing.
Yeah,
Like that is where they tell you like we are going everywhere with this strap in.
yeah, and there was a lot of dark humor in that one. Like just starting in the third episode where Anakin and Obi-Wan are joking about what nose like the worm is gonna go into the person's brain in, and like
Yeah.
that was disturbing. And like then obviously the whole last episode where like Ahsoka's trying to fend off Barasafi, that was really disturbing.
And the queen was like actually a horrifying like she was like the queen was horrifying.
Yeah, like it was a really creepy arc overall, and like fantastic battles to start it off with. But that almost feels like
hmm
a afterthought at that point.
Yeah, yeah. That not even just for thematic, like because I don't really think there was any maybe there was character building on Ahsoka's part, but for the most part, that was just like a shock value kind of arc.
Yeah, and other things that I forgot to mention. I'm a really big fan of the transition from season 1 to season 2 with the bounty hunters,
hmm
where they're assaulting on the Capitol. I thought that was awesome.
Oh yeah, I do love Cad Bane is probably if I was going to have to pick like a favorite character on the spot, Cad Bane would probably be it. Cad Bane was just such a cool. He was what Boba Fett kind of should have been in
Yeah,
the original trilogy. He was portrayed as badass, and he continued to be badass throughout the entire series.
Yeah, and like I just bringing that many bounty hunters into like one episode that was really cool, and that was the thing that I loved about that box episode as well. Another one of my favorite arcs I forgot to mention, and then another one that always goes under the radar that I'm a really big fan of was the arc with this is the one with Jar Jar Binks and Bail Organa. They're trying to negotiate for better trade conditions on Ryloth to relieve the siege there. And what I like about that one is it really portrays how well they handled politics in the series. And I think that was a fantastic choice by the writers because a big complaint coming out of the prequels was people were mad at George Lucas because he even tried to bring politics in it. But I feel like this series showed that you could do politics in the Star Wars universe and it could work. And you could make Jar Jar redeemable in that sense, and like he's a fun character. You could have someone like Lot Dodd, who's one of my favorite villains from the entire series because of that
Oh yeah,
episode. He just has so many great moments from that episode. Where like I have one of my favorites where like he's just sick of whatever Jar Jar's antics are in the series, and like he's just going to sip his water, and then like Jar Jar just steals it out of his hand. He's like, "No, my water!" Yeah. Like I
yeah.
just relate to Lot Dodd a lot. And, like he's my spirit animal within the series. But no, that's an element a lot of people miss that they do such a great job of politics. And there are some boring episodes, and they do stick way too long on whoever that ex boyfriend was of Padme. Like I didn't like that the Rush Clovis arcs at all. But overall, it was a strong choice to involve politics in the series.
I think Padme in general was not as good as a character in the Clone Wars. Like she didn't get much screen time, and when she did, it was always in episode arcs that were really awful. I felt like
Yeah, that's a good point.
her actor though is pretty great. I do like her. She was in Annihilation. I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh no, I haven't.
Um,
Hmm.
you would probably like Annihilation. But speaking of other Clone Wars things, did you know that there was a Clone Wars series that came before the
Yeah,
CGI
yes, I
one?
did actually.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I'm not really
That
a fan of it to be honest, but
I really liked that because it was done by the studio that did Samurai Jack, and I really liked Samurai Jack, and so it felt
oh,
like
that
Star
makes
Wars
sense.
Samurai Jack. It was basically just an hour and a half of fighting
Yeah,
and explaining things, and I really liked that actually because it basically felt like Space Samurai Jack. Well, more than Samurai Jack was, but yeah, I actually enjoyed that. I enjoyed that particular one, especially since did Yash showed you the sexy C-3PO scene
I don't think he
from
did
that one.
actually. No,
Do you remember that?
no, I don't think so.
So like C-3PO's in a back alley meeting Padme and Anakin, and he's wearing like a cloak, and this is after he gets the new paint job because in Clone Wars he didn't have it yet, and he gets the new gold chrome plated paint job, and they're explaining that. And so Anakin's like, "Well, let's see it," and then he does like a slow, like sexy drop off of the cloak, and it's like this classic like saxophone like oh my god, look at that person
Yeah,
thing, like that just plays, and it was a really, for me that's probably one of the funniest, just for the I liked if nothing else, I'm glad that that series existed purely because of the sexy C3PO scene that was funny.
yeah, and I can definitely see the parallels between that and Samurai Jack. I have no clue how I know what that is, but I, for some reason, am able to understand the stylistic parallels there.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I felt like the thing with Dirge was super weird, but I guess they needed to bring him in at some point. But have you seen any of the obviously you got the Lost episodes, which is basically season 6, but have you seen the episodes past that, where like they put
Mm,
out like the next 16 episodes, like what they would have looked like if they just released them at the point in production that they were at?
well, yeah, that's what I was talking about with the them finding out about the chips. That was like right at the end of that. Like that was one of the most finished I thought at least that that was one of the most finished episodes that they didn't release. Or did they release that series
To
where they
be honest,
find the
I'm not.
chips that order like that, like basically have order 66 on
Oh,
them, and they
that
get the
yeah, no, that
real.
was in the Lost episodes. Yeah, but I'm talking about the
Yeah.
ones where like it was not in finished production. Like the one where
No.
like they were
Well,
on.
I know there was. I remember seeing little tiny bits of it. There was one where Obi-Wan and Anakin are on some kind of like speeder thing in a cave.
Yeah,
But that's the only thing that I've seen from that series. No.
yeah, basically what they get into, they have an Utbau arc where they're hunting down like a giant kyber crystal. I'm kind of glad we
Oh
didn't get.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was kind of silly. It was mainly supposed to get into, and I wouldn't recommend watching it just because the animation style is ultimately just super creepy because it's not polished at all.
Hmm.
But it basically tries and to tie up some loose threads from the Ahsoka arc and like obviously her leaving and like trying to explain like how Anakin's dealing with the situation, how Obi-Wan's trying to help him through it. So there's that, and then there was a really weird one where they brought back Fives, and like Fives is like a now like a robot clone now that the Empire's trying to bring back for his intelligence, and it was super weird. It was cool because they went to Wat Tambor's home planet. I thought that was really cool, but that was pretty much the only thing that was good about that one. And then there were two more that were super. Oh yeah, there was one where Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Voss are on like an 8 episode arc where like they're just foraying into like a bunch of random stuff, and like they didn't even make that into a production. They just changed that into a book ultimately, and that was
Asajj
kind of.
Ventress was a fun character. I liked her.
She was. It seemed like they didn't really know what to do with her by the end of the series, but I mean, at least they didn't get rid of her.
Yeah. They just kind of threw her in with the bounty hunters.
Yeah, and it was super interesting because you could tell early on in the season they thought the series they thought that Grievous was going to be a much bigger part of it, but by the time season 4 rolls around, you barely see Grievous, and I think there was like one episode in like the last 3 seasons where you even see Grievous, that being the attack on Dathomir. But no, it was super weird that like Grievous just completely disappeared by the end of the series, especially considering how often he was in the first 2 or 3
Hmm.
seasons.
Well, he was I think they realized that they were overusing him.
Yeah.
Which is good because like I remember the culmination of them overusing him was they have this episode that's literally just him stranded on a planet, having to drag like a bunch of droids along with him, um, on a like as trying to get back to separatist controlled territory, and it's the droid banter is funny because the droids in that series are hilarious. Like I think the "oh my god" gag is still really funny. Because like every time they're about to die, they're like "oh my god," and then they're just dead.
Yeah.
That gag gets really old when it's the only thing that happens for an entire episode. And I think that was that. After that, like Grievous's roles start to really peter out. And I think it's because they realized with that episode we are using him way too much.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand that, and that is a bit of a problem in the series that like they lack a real consistent villain, but in a lot of ways that's a highlight of it as well, where like you're always every new season like you got someone new that the main characters are fighting. You start off with Grievous, then you move to bounty hunters, then you really move into Savage Press, then you move into Darth Maul, and I don't really know who's in season 5. I guess still Darth Maul, but it kind of jumps around. But and then throughout Palpatine. But I think that is the strength of it, and it is interesting that they never really kill any of the villains off. Obviously, Cad Bane does die at some point, but yeah,
In a really dumb, awful way. Just like the way that they kind of dropped the ball. His death should have been cooler than just like, "Oops, I lost to a little kid in a duel. Oops."
yeah. I mean, I'm happy that like they're not leaving open the option of him coming back later in the Star Wars canon because that.
Well, yeah, yeah. That then I really dislike when they reuse villains. The only time that was like done well was probably with Darth Maul.
Yeah, and that was just because he didn't really get enough time in the sun in the episode 1,
Hmm.
and I never really liked the fact that they brought back Captain Rex and the clones for Rebels. I thought that was someone that they should have just left alone. That they didn't really have a good reason to be bringing him back.
Well,
And
never mind that. But like, how? How? They're clones. Their life cycle is accelerated. Like how?
yeah, and like the fact that he's like 80 years old or something now,
Yeah,
like
like
he's like
80 years old, he would get that old like incredibly quickly. Like they even have an episode in the Clone Wars where there's an old man clone who's a janitor now.
yeah,
Remember? And like he's not that old. Like he was he was just one of the first batches of clones, and he's happened to survive. Like I just don't know how Rex is still alive. Maybe they explain it at some point, but either way, it's just dumb.
No, it makes no sense. I mean, when that old guy you mentioned, and that was like 5 to 10 years into his
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
and then like Rex, it would have been at least 30, if not more.
Hmm.
So like that just made no sense.
They probably have some made up nonsense about like, oh yeah, they've removed his genetic acceleration, which would not be a thing, but whatever.
Yeah, so I think that's yeah pretty much all of it for the Clone Wars. But I wanted to do one more thing for Star Wars. So something that Disney's been teasing is a new TV series that they're going to bring out, and it seems like it's going to focus mostly on bounty hunters. And it's
Oh yeah, the live action thing they're teasing.
yeah, it seems like they're just either bringing back Star Wars 1313 or they're I think it's called Star Wars Underworld or something. It's just focusing on like the basically the underbelly of Coruscant and just people working through it. And it seems like it's continuing a trend of them trying to tell the stories of the people who aren't directly Jedi or Sith. So that could be interesting. Are you excited for that at all?
It depends on how they do it. So like you have the Marvel series like Arrow that are just like, oh yes, it's sexy dude, and we're gonna basically just follow sexy dude through his adventures and all of his escapades, and he has sex like at least once per episode, and because there are definitely TV shows that trend in that direction, and that would be awful for a Star Wars show to do. If it becomes something more like maybe like a less cheesy Doctor Who, where like story arcs are relevant and there's minimal romantic tension because romantic tension kind of ruins seriousness of television arcs. Um, then yeah, I can totally see that being a show that I would watch. But I think that something that ruins a lot of TV shows is they get too caught up in romance, like, oh, is he gonna love her and that kind of thing, and then it's like, okay, well, now this is more of a romance story than it is a action story.
No,
And I think if they can avoid making it very romancy and whatnot, then yeah, it'll be worth watching.
no, definitely. And I'm curious to see where it's going to come out on because a lot of speculation that I've been seeing is that Disney's developing its own streaming platform to compete
Hmm.
with Netflix and Hulu, and it seems like that's going to be an exclusive property on there. And it'll be interesting to see how willing people are to go out and pay for it just for that. And really, it'll just come down to how many exclusive licensing deals they can get with different TV shows and movies. That's why people choose different streaming platforms. But
Yeah.
something else that's coming out with Disney and Star Wars is they've got to think about a new trilogy that's coming up after this new trilogy is finished in what 2019, yeah. So what do you want, what time period do you want them to explore, and like do you think that they should pull from the EU to get a new storyline, or should they just get something completely new?
To be honest, I wouldn't mind if they like started like a quote unquote new, because I know that like the definition of a I thought the definition of a trilogy was like three sets of three. So like this next set of three movies would complete kind of the circle that is the Star Wars trilogy. So I would appreciate if they just did not tie it in any way, shape, or form to these three. Like these three, they all have kind of tentative links between each other. If they're going to do another trilogy, I want it to be like 1,000 years before the Galactic Republic or something like that. Like just completely rip it up from its roots and start somewhere completely different.
Yeah, and it seems like that's what they're trying to do. At the very least, they're killing off the Skywalker family a little bit, so that's good. And I've seen a lot of conversation coming out of Disney where they're like, we're done with the main series that focuses on the story of Luke and Han Solo and Leia, and they're basically their kids at this point. But so that would be great. And something that I would really like to see out of the new trilogy is they go back into the Old Republic era, or if not the Old Republic, then like somewhere in that time frame, and either they get something completely new or they tell the story of the Old Republic. It seems like that, and they've done the present, they've gone into the future, now they have to go into the past. And if they're going to go into the past, they have to do something completely new because we can't have the same problem of the prequels where we know what's going to happen to every character because
Yeah,
that works occasionally, but at some point where that's just happening every movie, that gets kind of old.
I'd like to see the Jedi. I'd like to see the Jedi Sith Wars get a trilogy.
Yeah, that'd be great, and especially if we could get some like original characters from that. I mean, I'm as big of a fan as of the Old Republic as anyone, but like I don't want to just see the cutscenes from the game just put into a movie. That's I can find that on YouTube if I want
Yeah, I'm thinking about watching a playthrough of the Old Republic because I don't. It's isn't it not like is that's not a single player game, is it? It was like an MMO,
to.
or was that something else?
I know I think it
I
was an MMO. Yeah,
there were because there were a bunch of games. There were a bunch of Star Wars games that were people really liked, but they're kind of dead now, and you can't really play them by yourself.
yeah,
Um, I'd heard that like the oh, what is it? Not the Force Unleashed. I heard that those were good if you could disconnect it from the canon because it was really awful canonically.
yeah,
Because like Darth Vader's apprentice and whatnot. But I think I'm planning on playing those as well. The problem with some of the older games, like it doesn't matter how good they are, the graphics are and controls are just so old gen that it's difficult to stomach them. I had this problem with Oblivion. Like the game is great, but like it's so old gen that you just can't really stomach it. Um, so I will have to consider going through like the old Star Wars games that people really like, and I have heard though that their plots are really good.
yeah. No, definitely. And I played the Force Awakens series myself. I not the Force Awakens, the
Yeah.
maybe that one didn't come out. The Force Unleashed series. It doesn't work canonically at all, but I mean, it's the same thing that I do for using Vong. I just say I don't really care what the canon says, so like it kind of works.
Well, it's not canonical because of the. It wasn't even canonical in terms of the original Star Wars. Like when Lucas had it, like he said right off the bat, like this is just a game. This is not canonical for the series. So
No, I know, because like they literally bring like Princess Leia up to the Death Star before she's supposed to be up on the Death Star, so like
yeah,
that makes no sense.
it's yeah.
But no, it's a fun series, and you're gonna play an overpowered character, and it's what it's titled, The Force Unleashed. You just get to play like a character that's just throwing around the Force everywhere, and he's shooting lightning at everybody, and like at some points I just didn't even use the lightsaber because I didn't see a reason to.
Oh
But
yeah, there are a lot of games that are like that. Shadow of Mordor is kind of like that as well, where it's just like let me just throw all of this like let me just kind of spam buttons, and it's still enjoyable at least because it's like you have your games that are difficult, and then sometimes you kind of want to just sit down and say I want to just destroy everything.
yeah, no, definitely. But what standalone movies would you want Disney pursuing after they make this Boba Fett movie? I know they were talking about an Obi-Wan movie, but would that be something you would actually want to see?
I love Ewan McGregor. He's a great actor, but like I don't. I kind of want to get away from like this period of like basically 100 years from the start of the first series to the end of the final trilogy. I kind of want to get out of that time period. Like, cool, it's fun. Let's do something else, and preferably something in the past. So I would want to see. If they're going to do another trilogy, I would want to see a movie, like a movie trilogy about the Sith Empire versus the Jedi Order. If they're going to do standalones, for standalones, I'd probably want to see um, maybe maybe a backstory movie for Jango Fett or something like that. Because like Boba Fett, it's like okay, well he's a clone, he becomes a bounty hunter like his father. End of story. But we don't know who Jango Fett is. Maybe something more related to Mandalore, like
Yeah,
really heavily related to Mandalore, because Mandalore is a fun planet. Maybe even a standalone movie about the Mandalorian Wars with the Galactic Republic. That would be cool.
yeah, that'd be pretty good. The big,
Um, Go ahead.
yeah. So the biggest thing that I want out of a standalone movie is I just want them to make a movie adaptation of the Darth Plagueis novel. I think that that book is absolutely fantastic. It
Mm-hmm.
makes the prequel era fascinating. It brings in a new Sith Lord that's really interesting. It's clear from how everyone got so
The
attached to Snoke that people want a new cool Sith Lord. They're like,
Darth Bane, right?
no, Darth Plagueis.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So like, and what he's just known for is being super cerebral and always thinking through everything. And ultimately, like his fall from power makes complete sense with his character. it doesn't even seem that unreasonable to make it into a movie. It's like a 400-page book. That's
Hmm.
not that bad, and like it's and while like it is difficult to portray like a thinking character for a movie, especially from a mainstream movie where like they don't want to do internal monologue, I still think it would be so worth it. And people like Darth Plagueis as a character. You've seen the Plagueis memes.
Well, yeah, and also like just as I know like he was trying to find immortality and everything, and Darth Sidious was his apprentice, and Darth Sidious was jealous of his apparent grasp on immortality and killed him. Um, and it's the whole meme. It's like it's not a story the Jedi would tell you and all that. Honestly, that's also really in character for Darth Sidious, killing him to try and take his place and everything. I would like to see it. I agree. A Darth Plagueis movie would be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up Star Wars. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Uh, cut. But yeah, I guess we should move on to our second topic of the day since Star Wars surprisingly took an hour and 45 minutes. I guess we can
Yeah, yeah,
get into video games a little bit because I know that's something we both do, and I figured we'll avoid the too personal stuff for this first one and maybe get
hmm.
into that some other time. So, what games are you currently playing?
Well, I had bought Fallout 4, and I was, testing that one out with mods and stuff like that. And then I decided I kind of need to, transition. I don't like staying on one game for too long, so I actually picked up Subnautica. I don't know if you've played Subnautica, but it's this survival horror game, and the horror aspect is really the sound design and everything. The music and the sound design is terrifying. Like the creatures make really awful, horrifying noises, and if you mute it, it's very suddenly not scary at all. Or if you just keep the water sounds and stuff like that, like it's not at all scary. But just the sound and music design in that game make it like horrifying to play. And basically, you're on this all water planet, and your ship has been destroyed by some kind of unknown factor that's caused you to crash land on this planet. And you have to go around figuring out why did you crash. You have to collect resources. It's basically like it's almost like a more intense survival kind of for lack of a better term, like Minecraft type thing where you collect resources. You're not mining things though. You're collecting plants and animals and mineral outcrops that contain resources that you need. And you have this PDA that helps you. And your goal is get off the island, or not off the planet and get home. It's very good. I recommend it heavily if you're into the kind of survival-y kind of games. I'm not big into survival games, but I really enjoyed Subnautica.
Okay, that sounds a lot like Fortnite, to be honest. Aside from it obviously not being an FPS game,
Yeah.
did you ever check out Fortnite at all, or did you just let that pass by like me?
No, I suck at FPS games. I don't play FPS games.
Yeah, me too. I'm garbage at them.
I will play single player FPS games because they kind of like allow for less skill because they have difficulty levels. So it's like yes, we're aware that a lot of people suck at this, so we're gonna make this as forgiving as possible for people who suck at FPS games. Like Fallout 4 does a good job of that because it just has a handicap mode basically. It's got VATS, which just lets you almost completely pause time and just pre-aim and like automatically aim at things and shoot things instead of having to aim. And I found myself I basically used it as a crutch because I'm incapable of aiming at things. Yeah, that's one of the primary reasons why I like Fallout is because the gameplay itself does not prevent you from enjoying the world that you're in.
Yeah, my biggest problem with a lot of those games is I never trust playing the CPUs just because I know how easy it is to program difficulty badly. Because another problem with me is I'm a bit of a masochist with games. Like I like to kill myself on them or something. I always have them on the highest difficulty, and then
Yeah,
I just get
yeah.
destroyed on it every single time. It definitely makes the highs higher. Like when you actually when it feels amazing, but it's difficult to go through really long losing streaks on it just for the sake of feeling like you're facing the best competition. And my thing is, I want to be doing a lot more multiplayer games because of that. So like, I don't have to worry about is the difficulty setting really fair. But my problem is once again, like I'm not really good enough to be doing that with most games. Right now, I've been getting super into the new MLB game that just came out because I'm for some reason a sports gamer. So like that's been a lot of fun because I actually am good enough at that game to do online multiplayer. So I've been killing that. But aside from that, what games have I been getting into? I've been super into the new Plants vs Zombies 2 battles update. They actually made an update where like it's a relegation system that basically feeds off of the. It's kind of like the system they used for iZombie in the original game, but basically you have to kill the zombies as far back as you can. And I've been having so much fun with it because it's a relegation system, and no games use relegation systems, and it makes no sense to me why they don't. It works brilliantly in English soccer, and I
Would you explain what a relegation system is to me, please?
yeah, sure. So you know how most I don't know. I guess most games that just do tournaments and like whoever wins, they're just the champion and they get all the prize. And then
Hmm.
so in a relegation system, basically how it would work is I'll give the example in the English Premier League because it's the easiest one to think of off the top of my head. So basically how it works. Well, actually, let me just do the Plants vs Zombies one. That's gonna be a lot easier. So every player within it is organized. Okay, so basically how it functions is there's a series of tiers, and you can move up and down in tiers by your performance in each previous tier that you were in. So basically how it works is every person starts off at the lowest tier, and then each tier has a pool of 15 players within it. The top three players within that pool every week move up a tier, and then the bottom three players move down a tier, and then the other nine players just stay the same. Personally, I
Yeah,
would.
I've played games that use some systems like that. I like it when it's when a victory is not established. If you get lazy, then you drop down in ranking. I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot too because it fixes a game mechanic that I struggle a lot with. Where if I'm doing like an online multiplayer game and like it's a ranked thing, like and not a tier system, I will get a super high ranking after just getting on a winning streak or something, and then I don't want to play the game anymore because I'm like I don't want to go down in my ranking, and there's no penalty for not playing. The ranking just stays the same, so
Hmm.
I don't
Hmm.
play it. But if I did that in this, I would just drop all the way back down to the bottom. So I think it's a fantastic system.
And it's good. It's good for the game companies too because it keeps people playing.
Oh yeah, it keeps you super invested because the more you play, the harder it gets, and like it's just a difficulty curve all the way. And like I do wish you, when you were playing the games, you could only play the people within the pool, but I could see how that could get either boring or problematic. And I do wish the pools were also bigger because in English soccer, they're like pools of 24 players, teams really. And I think that's a better system than 15. I think 15 is a little on the small side, but
Hmm.
I can see why they did it for the trial run. I guess they weren't sure how many people would really do it. And it is kind of weird because they have like 12 tiers. So like it's a big long tier system.
Yeah. Speaking of Plants vs Zombies 2, I've heard that that game is really like pay to winny. Like it's very microtransaction-y. There are certain tiers, like there's certain levels you can't get past without microtransactions, stuff like that. Have you experienced in your time playing that game that like maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, maybe you don't care because like you were gonna spend money on it anyway, kind of thing?
Well, for me, as you know, I'm a notorious cheapskate where I don't spend any money on games. I struggle even spending money to get the online multiplayer features in some games. Like I literally just recently bought the online multiplayer features for my PlayStation. Like I hadn't had it for like 2 years because I just I wasn't willing to spend that money. But
Yeah, that's one of the ridiculous parts about console gaming. It's like if there's a game that's available on PC, like they can't not let you have online features by default. I think the whole buying online features is ridiculous.
yeah, and some games are just exclusive to consoles, so there's nothing you can do. But for all iPhone or iPad games, I just disable the in-app purchases because I don't even want to see it in front of me. Now, something I did experience with Plants vs Zombies 2, it is a lot harder than the original game, which is something I'm happy with. I want to be challenged in the game, and like I want to feel like okay, there are some levels that I really have to think outside the box to win. I can't just keep powering through it using the exact same strategy over and over again,
Hmm.
which you could do in the original game, and like it wasn't hard at all. Like this one is very hard, and like there's something like I think there's 8 or 10 worlds, and each of them has at least 35 levels in it. The most being like 44, 44. So it's a significant amount of levels, and truthfully, I haven't beaten the game because I just found it too hard, and I don't like thinking outside the box. So but I like the fact that like I have something to come back to if I want to have that challenge. I don't want to just beat a game and then be like, now what? That's not fun for me.
Well, see, the thing is, I think with that game in particular, and there have been other games like this in the past, it is literally impossible to progress past certain levels without microtransactions.
That's
I think there was someone who actually proved that with Plants vs Zombies too. That
I
there
I,
are just portions of the game that are locked, basically.
I would have
Big,
to see that. I don't really believe that, to be honest. It doesn't seem like they're impossible levels. I mean, maybe if they mean microtransactions like spending the in-game currency that you can get from playing the game, if that's what they mean, then I could understand that. But even still, I think you can always find a way. And
well, there was a game recently that people were really enjoying. It was like an MMO. Well, it wasn't an MMO. It was like this weird think uh, kind of like a more linear Bloodborne type thing, with like a more like kind of dark carnival type feel to it. It was a free to play game, but the leveling system, basically you could not like the enemies leveled exponentially faster than you did at a base level. So at level 10 you'd be fighting level 50 enemies, and so it took a while for you to get to level 10 and for that to happen. But suddenly you spent 3 or you've spent 20 or 30 hours in the game, and then all of a sudden you hit this level where it is literally 100% impossible. And they've like the devs have like effectively confirmed this. They haven't said this outright, but like people have proven that no matter like that it's one of those games where you can only level using low level enemies for a certain amount of time. Like Pokemon, like early Pokemon games, you can only like you know if you're too high level, you can't gain XP from defeating really low level foes.
yeah,
And in this particular game, you reached that maxed out limit before you were capable of actually, you know, you were still a one shot for the boss, and it would take you literally 1,000 hits at basically maxed out damage to destroy the boss. And so, and it's this thing where the boss has like a timed finisher as well, so you can't it is literally impossible to finish the game without using a transaction to boost your XP level, basically. How would you feel if you were playing a game like that and you got to that point?
I mean, I wouldn't play the game. Yeah, I wouldn't think that's fair. Like at some level, I'm fine with microtransactions if they want to put it in. Like, and this was something I wanted to talk about was what you thought of the culture of microtransactions in video games. So I'm glad you brought this up. Like, I have no problem with developers bringing that in. If people are stupid enough to spend money on it, I don't have a problem with it. I have a problem with it if they make it
Mandatory.
obviously it's not impossible to beat that, but at that point, like you're putting way too much time into beating that one boss, and like that's not a
And
realistic expectation.
frustration, and it's like you're making the game, basically sacrificing the enjoyment of the game for forcing microtransactions is what I don't like.
Yeah, and like I hope that's not what's happening the majority of the time with microtransactions. I don't think it is. I think microtransactions mainly are coming up to speed your progress through the game if you want to and avoid some grinding elements. Like the example I always come back to is like a Clash of Clans where you can do really well in that game without spending a single dollar on it. It's just going to take a lot longer. And it's not necessarily going to take away from the fun of the game, but if progressing super quickly is something you value, then
I
I
see. Now I hate when there is a game that pits you against other players. I do not like progression speed ups in multiplayer like MMO games that require you to be like combating other anytime you're competing with someone else. I think in a game where you have microtransactions, they should be cosmetic or gimmicky. Like
Like
say you're
Overwatch.
in say it's like let's use like just as a really loose example, like let's say Call of Duty decides to make an MMO game. Um they have microtransactions. The types of microtransactions that I would want in an like a pure Call of Duty MMO, I guess, would be cosmetics or like novelties, like things that you can buy and are exclusive to you, but they're not better or worse than things that are available for free in the game, like a special gun. Like a special model, like maybe an advanced model of the AK-47 that's only available to you because you paid for it, but it's not better. It's balanced as if it was a gun that was in the game, kind of thing.
That's one way of looking at it. I think that's a good option, honestly. I wonder if it would be a good system if you just had like an option where like you could flip a switch where like in the settings or something where you would only be matched against players in online play who hadn't spent any money on the game, if that was something that you wanted to do and like you yourself hadn't spent any money on the game. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems like that would be avoiding the problem. And like I can see your point that like only allowing you to spend money on cosmetic details, it does create a solution to that problem. But that a pivotal thing in microtransactions is speeding up the progression of the game, and cosmetics obviously isn't doing that at all. And that's something that a lot of people value in microtransactions. And I think that's something that microtransactions should be doing.
I think as long as that person doesn't then get to use their advanced progression to then destroy people who don't have that advanced progression. So like there are MMO games where it's like, oh, I paid for this progression, so I paid to get through this quicker, so I'm at an actual advantage over people who get to the same position but with less progression or with slower progression without that sped up progression. Um, I think that I would be like the Elder Scrolls Online has the opportunity for you to speed up progression with microtransactions. And that's a whole other beast because it's a game that has always had a $60 price tag and DLC, and then it also has microtransactions, which kind of disgusts me. But the only like microtransactions in $60 mainline games kind of bother me because it's like you didn't make enough money off of the overpricing of the $60 product already. Um, but regardless, they have a sped up progression system, but it doesn't affect other players. Like if a player decides I'm not going to spend money to get to this point, they are at equal levels with another opponent who did get there faster, and the only difference is experience. And so then it feels like, oh, well, he paid to get there quicker, he gets there first, but I get there with better experience and more skill. That is perfectly okay. But then you have games where like the fact that you've used this advanced progression opens up your like gives you the ability to use your other resources to get advantages over people who got to the same point but without that sped up progression. And there are games like that that say like, okay, you get the sped up progression and you get not only the sped up progression but you get perks that give you a direct advantage over other people.
Yeah, I can see what you mean, and I'm not any more of a fan of the perks system. As I've said before, I'm perfectly fine with the speeding up of gameplay if you don't want to do that. But yeah, a perk system where, let's say you're in a Call of Duty game and like say there's like a super overpowered weapon that you can only get if you put like you spend like $5 on an in-app purchase, and if you buy that thing, you're gonna do a lot better in online multiplayer than if you did not buy that. I can see the problem there, and yeah, that kind of stuff should not be allowed. Or if
It's
it should only be allowed in single player.
it's the difference between like um, implied or effective progression. So like selling things that do help you progress the game faster because they're overpowered or they basically just let you be better than other people at a lower skill level. Versus things that just literally like an XP bonus so that you can get you can rank up higher faster. And the problem with I guess Call of Duty Online multiplayer is that you're ranked with people who are at different levels from you, I think if you have a system where you can progress faster than other people, you have to be ranked at skill level basically, or not even skill level necessarily, like maybe a combination of skill level and like progression level. Games where you can be at the max level have as good. There's a new game called Fractured Space, and it's like a you control a dreadnought in a space warfare kind of situation MMO. Um, the problem with that game is that everybody gets ranked with anybody, so there's no like because there's no actual like tiers of progression. All of the ships are kind of available to you at the start, and you just have to unlock them by playing. Like, you get your starter ship, and then you can just unlock any of the other ships that you want as you go. And like, there are kind of effective levels based on price range, but they're all unlocked to you from the start. So say you're like, I'm going to grind my starter ship and get the most expensive ship in the game by grinding. You can do that. Um, but the problem with that is people who are just starting the game get matched with people who have been playing for a long time. And there's no actual there actually aren't progression. There isn't a way to speed up progression with money in that game, which is part of the criticism of that game actually, is that it's way too grindy, and there's no way to get around that grind. Um, and the criticism that a lot of people have with that game is you get people who are literally just in a better position to trump noobs, basically to Seal Club, just because they've been playing the game longer. And that's another issue that you have in a lot of games, yes, nowadays, is that sometimes seniority trumps like new players, and that's just a bad business model. If you're, old players who've maybe spent their money and aren't going to spend any more money, um, or maybe they get bored of the game and like, okay, well, I'm done with this now. I've basically reached the highest level. Like, punishing new players is a bad business model, and a lot of games do that as well.
No, I definitely agree with that, and that's something I've definitely experienced as well, and that's why I think that the promotion relegation system works a lot better in that it matches people against other people of their same experience and same
Hmm.
skill level, and I think that's incredibly important in games. And yeah, I don't understand why in like a FPS game, if you get on, you'll join a lobby and like you're a level 1 or something, and then you see a level 20 pop in, and you're like, wait, what the heck? And like then
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
and like they'll just dominate the game. That doesn't seem fair at all. I don't see a good reason for why they do that
Well,
other than
there,
laziness.
there, there's there's kind of like an internalized model of monetizing a game, where you kind of like the idea is that new player sees older player. There's actually a patent on this that a few companies have a patent on, where it's a matchmaking system that puts new players in positions with purposely overskilled players who have purchased a lot of items. And the point is that the new player says, "Wow, look at all the shiny stuff that guy has. I want that." They go pay for it so that they can be like that guy. But the problem with that is that it assumes that people aren't just going to get irritated with it, say, "This is dumb. I'm not going to play a game where I have to pay to be as good as that guy," and just quit. Which, studies have shown actually, well, not like, scientific studies, but surveys done by, news outlets, gaming news outlets, have shown that people are more likely to just drop a game that has content like that than they are to continue it. But the problem is that they don't make their money off of those, all the people who quit. They make it off of the one or two, they call them whales,
Yeah.
um, that pay, $400 a week to play the game. And I think that's kind of the problem. And there's no way you can really fix that unless the company goes out of their way to limit how much profit they make, which you can't reasonably expect a company to do. But there are companies that I've heard that are very. There's a game called Warframe or something like that. And somebody was abusing they had a system that gave you like a slight weapons advantage or something like that, and it was just people were okay with it. But then they realized that people were like paying tons of money to get this like buff basically over and over again, and it made them progress really quickly, and they removed it from the game, rather than letting people like whales um, uh, overpay for things and then get to be better in the game. They specifically avoid having a whale kind of environment where you have a few people who pay tons of money and have everything and have all the bells and whistles. And it's a successful business model. The game is doing well. So I think the idea, though, that the only way a company can succeed is by relying on whales and stuff like that and monetizing things so that you have to pay to um, progress is a flawed. It's flawed logic. I think you can make a game that's fair and people will willingly put money forth rather than feeling like they have to put money forth.
No, I definitely agree with that, and yeah, it's not a fair system where you can just spend a bunch of money and be better than everyone else. I think it involves a lot of people's problems with society in general that some people can do that, and the fact that games that are supposed to be a release from society and escape, if you
Yeah,
will, like
yeah, I agree.
that's not a good precedent.
And that also brings us around to the idea of like DLC.
Yeah, I was
Um,
about to go there actually. Yeah.
yeah, DLC is so there. It depends. So like Fallout 4, as an example, I was not happy with the DLC because I felt like the DLC was stuff that should have been in the base game. And in fact, there are glitches that are caused by the fact that you don't own a specific DLC in the base game,
Oh,
which makes it extremely obvious that they made the game and then their parent company or they themselves said we're cutting this and this out to make as DLC. Um, because obviously, if you have a glitch from the absence of a DLC, clearly the problem is that you just removed the DLC and didn't test all of your results.
yeah.
Make sure that that didn't have any overbearing effect on the game. But yeah, there are a lot of there were a few glitches in Fallout 4 that could only be solved by purchasing a specific DLC. And the thing is, I don't have an issue with games taking out content and then releasing it as DLC. What I do have a problem with is the way that they go about doing it. They kind of punish players who purchase the game outright by making it, you have the initial release which is like $60. Then you have the DLC releases, and then after all of that they have a game of the year edition or they have a bundle edition that's the same price as the original game but with all of the content bundled in it. Like I'm going to use Skyrim as an example. You can buy Skyrim now for an like in the special edition quality with all of the DLCs and stuff for a for like half the price that Skyrim launched for without its DLC. And I think that's unfair because you're punishing players who bought out immediately. I think that those bundles should be. I feel like people who purchase the game should get DLC for free. Like, they have the season pass thing where all future DLC and current DLC, you get it for free with this one time payment. Um, I feel like people who purchase the game within a certain time after its release should get that for free. Because if you're not, you're basically incentivizing people to say, oh, I'll wait to buy this. Like, I want to buy Far Cry 5. I'm not going to do that for at least another year because I want to buy it at a reasonable price along with all of its DLC that it's inevitably going to have. So I'm going to wait a year and I'm going to buy Far Cry 5 and all of its DLC probably at a discounted price from what its release price was. Meanwhile, people who bought it like this week are going to have to pay full price for each of the DLC.
No, that is a bad system, and yeah, I go through the same thing where like I want to wait as long as I can before buying a game because I'm like, okay, obviously if I just wait like 2 or 3 weeks, either it's gonna go on sale or
Mm-hmm.
the price is gonna drop.
Especially on Steam.
Yeah, or I can get like an online digital order where I don't even have to wait for the package, and like it just doesn't make sense to
Mm-hmm.
have a system where players are waiting and waiting to actually buy your game. And it's clear where the economic factors there are pushing companies to have a system like that, but it's not beneficial for the company to do that, and it's not beneficial for the player to do that either. So
No, because
obviously that needs to be fixed.
right, because they're setting up this situation where people are just not buying the game on release day, and one of the biggest indicators of financial success for a game is its release day sales. Like, games that have really poor releases, like sometimes immediately a company will drop the franchise, even if later on that release becomes incredibly popular, and they're kind of setting themselves up for like the majority of purchases to be at like a later date, and I think that's a mistake, just even monetarily. Like I bought Middle Earth: Shadow of Mordor recently, and that game was like a AAA $60 out of the box title, and I have it and all of its DLC for $20.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
albeit that's an older game, but like that kind of punishes people who, well, retroactively punishes people who spent like $60 for the original release and then bought all of the DLC afterwards. Like it's just not a sound. You're punishing grandfathered in players basically.
Yeah, and that I completely agree. That's not a good system. Like overall, I don't have much of a problem with DLC. I think what it was designed for was when game developers they are on a tight creation schedule, so
Oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah,
like
with
they can't get the actual content into the game, so they have to release it later.
well
But
that's
unfortunately,
that
that's not how it works today.
yeah that was originally um the idea of DLC started with GameStop actually, because GameStop is an awful company.
Hmm.
They told a developer of a game, I think it might have been Call of Duty, hey, we want to start this new idea. It's called pre-ordering, and if you pre-order, you get a special quest for free. I guess it couldn't have been Call of Duty because there's no quests in Call of Duty, but it was some game, and the other company was like, "That's a great idea. We price it more than launch day release, and they get extra content for it. But we don't want to make extra content. What if we just take a slice out of the game and sell it as part of the pre-order package?" And GameStop said, "That's a great idea. What if we did that just after the game has released too, and call it downloadable content?" And so GameStop actually kind of started. I don't think they were the first company to do DLC by any stretch of the imagination. DLC's been around since Morrowind, actually.
Oh
Um,
wow.
but they were definitely the company that made it mainstream.
No, definitely, and yeah, it's unfortunate that that's how the system has basically devolved and just it's become
Because
a
originally it was like, here's additional content. And Subnautica, that game that I was telling you about, they actually are doing DLC the way it was meant to be done. They are currently working on DLC for Subnautica that's a whole new, basically, quest. It's not really a quest, it's a whole new storyline for the game, taking place in a whole new biome for the game. But they didn't finish developing it before Subnautica was supposed to release. So they're finishing it now, and they're going to release it as DLC. That that is how DLC should work. I am going to be more than happy to pay for that DLC because I know it's additional content. And they are reusing, like they are taking content that was cut from the original game and putting it into the DLC. But it's not that it was cut for the DLC; it was cut because it didn't fit anywhere in the continuum that they had in the original game. They're taking things that they had planned for and then said, because there's tons of stuff in games that like never gets released or gets cut and then stays cut because they're like, this doesn't really belong anywhere. They're taking some of that stuff and then putting it in the DLC. And I'm definitely, no matter how much it comes out for, unless they're like, here's the game for, because the original game costs $25. If it costs another $25, to be honest, if there's enough content, I will totally buy it because it's brand new content. It's not stuff that was taken. I'm not feeling gypped from the original game
yeah
because
no
I
I,
don't have the DLC.
yeah I absolutely understand that and yeah like that is the ideal situation where they didn't have enough time based on the production schedule, so they had to shelve it and just sell it later. But that's not being done as I've already said. That's not what's happening right now, and I wonder why that's actually the case, to be honest, because it doesn't seem like games have gotten any shallower in terms of content.
Well, unless you look at Battlefront.
Well, yeah, Battlefront's like the worst possible example though. Like that one was
It is the ultimate, like, this is the extreme of what is actually happening in the game industry kind of thing. People kind of talk about it as if it's the norm, but it's literally only the norm for that company.
yeah. Plus
And
it's
people should have
EA.
known that um like long ago, because EA is notorious for this kind of thing, and it just gets worse and worse every time. I don't think they're going to last much longer as a company. um well, no, they will, but I don't think their titles are going to be as popular.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they rebranded or something. Just because you know, if the company just changes its name, nobody's either gonna care or remember what they originally were.
Yeah, this is true.
But definitely, it seems like companies should be making more money from their video games because something that I don't understand right now is that video games have always been priced at $60, and that's regardless of inflation. So something I ran a quick calculation, and SNES games back in the '80s, those were originally $60. So if you would just adjust for inflation, that would be $100 games right now. And there's a lot of complaints coming out from video game companies that video games aren't able to make enough money, or they have to rely on too many opening week sales or whatever to make up for not profit investment, just investment initially. And I don't know how true that is, but if it is, that would make sense because they haven't been able to raise the prices at all because people are going to be like, "What, $100? That's completely unfair," even though it's
It
perfectly
it's
reasonable.
it's because they set their budget too high. To be honest, I think budget management in the industry is really awful because you have tons of indie games that are like Subnautica is a like triple A title basically in everything but like actuality because it's not done by a triple A developer. It is a developer that up until now did mods of Half Life as their like primary game and made money off of that. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
Whereas and then they go and make Subnautica, and they're a small team, and they're able to make it a title that is wildly popular and makes a ton of money, and their price tag is $25, not 60. So I think the problem is that they just either maybe they have teams that are too large. I think actually what it is that they have to make their teams exorbitantly large because their goal is to get things out in like a year. Like there's a new soccer game every year. And so they have teams that basically are like, we have to crank this out in a year, so we're going to hire tons of people to crank it out in a year and still have a finished product. And I think that's why it costs them so much money is because they want to crank out games sometimes within months.
yeah, no, and that it is ridiculous that some of the production teams are as big as they are, and it seems like overall AAA gaming right now it is way too much of a investment in great graphics that frankly people can't tell the difference at a certain point where like literally the resolution of your iris like it can't see the actual difference in like the pixels at this point,
Yeah,
and like it
yeah.
just takes it too far. And like
Um,
obviously that's like the most expensive part of games, but it's also like it's making the games take up way too much data. It's creating a really annoying thing for console gamers where you buy the game and then you can't play the game for like another hour because you have to download the game as well because the
mhm,
game can't be
mhm.
run on your console.
Yeah, and that's another major problem is that like you're getting to a point where casual gamers just can't play the game at that level. Like you're basically you're spending so much time and forcing it to be as look as good as it does for such a small subsect of people. Um, you really I agree. They have their priorities in weird places. Like they're focusing so much on graphics and stuff like that. But in the end, like no matter how good the graphics are and like parts, like you're gonna have things like LOD, that are just gonna screw that up for you because like there's always graphical glitches and stuff like that. So they should focus on them being good, but not every game has to shatter the bounds of the other game's graphics.
Yeah, and I really don't know where that's coming from that they feel like the graphics are the biggest thing they have to improve at this point. Maybe it's the whole VR thing where they're saying that people care so much about that they need to be making normal games look just as good, but that doesn't really make that much sense to me. But
It's a consumer thing. Consumers want games that look better and better and better, but the problem is that that's like the most vocal minority of individuals because most people, like most gamers, eventually have a gaming computer that's capable of doing decent graphics. But even when you're building a gaming computer, you're like, okay, I want good graphics, but I'm not going to spend $2,000 on a graphics card that lets me watch, that lets me play. I don't know, Skyrim or Call of Duty at like 12,000 FPS on the highest graphics settings. Because at that point, like you're even distracting yourself almost. Like read plays CS:GO on minimum graphics settings because it lets you focus on the gameplay, not on ooh, look how flashy that is and stuff like that. Um, I think there needs to be a shift in focus from uh, you know as good graphics as possible and as large a team and as fast a production period as possible, and shift more to a focus on let's make it as efficient as possible so that we can make money while producing a quality product.
Yeah, definitely, and that's something that you see in indie games where they don't focus
Mm-hmm.
on amazing graphics and like they focus on making either innovative gameplay or just like more cult classic games where like they can invest smaller amounts of money but expect huge payoffs just because they're original or people aren't used to the kinds of gambles that they take. Because there's a big trend right now in all forms of media that people are getting kind of sick of mainstream stuff and they want to see more risks happening. They want to see more original content just in all areas, in movies and TV and in games, obviously, and it just like they want to see something different, and like that's why you're seeing the indie scene pop up in so many different places in music and games and yeah, in movies too, and like just and people are getting sick of just seeing the same formulaic thing over and over. Like it
Mm-hmm.
goes back to what
Mm-hmm.
I was saying earlier with the just watching the same hero's journey just 1,000 times. Like it's not enjoyable at a certain point. It's predictive and like it's not going to surprise you. And another thing on the graphics is the graphics that last long beyond the game's shelf life are the ones where like it's not trying to be the most high fidelity graphics you've ever seen. Those are the games that go out of style the fastest. Like those are games.
Right, because people are like, "Oh wow, look how ugly that looks compared to this thing now."
Yeah, it's the games that like create their own art style. Games like Nintendo's Super Mario Brothers franchise. Games like recently Cuphead that came out. Like it
Oh
hasn't.
yeah, Cuphead's graphics were awesome.
Yeah, and like that's not a crazy complicated graphic system. It's a lot simpler than what a lot of AAA games are doing right now. But that one's going to last far longer than games like The Last of Us's shelf life because it's not trying to replicate reality, and which is going to
Right,
inevitably fall off.
and we have to make the distinction here: simplicity in design, like in design, not necessarily in creating it. Because Cuphead's graphics must have taken hours and hours, even like weeks to complete. Like that
Yeah.
game is a masterpiece. But yeah, like picking a style and then sticking to it and doing it well. Like 8-bit games and stuff like that. Those are always going to be like popular. So and if you get into a situation where those kinds of games are competing with each other, suddenly graphics is thrown out the window because it's like, well, the graphics on this game don't matter. They're and when I say graphics, of course, I don't mean like obviously if somebody makes an 8-bit game that looks atrocious to play and is hard to see and stuff
Yeah.
like that, that's different. But like if you compare a game that's 8-bit and does its graphics well and a game that tries for realism and does that well for the time, like the one stands up to the test of time way better than the other. Like people still play the original Mario. I don't think people still play like and I've even read about this. Like people don't play stuff like Morrowind anymore because Morrowind was trying to be at least semi-realistic for the time, but it's just so hard on like people want a remaster of Morrowind and Oblivion. Not necessarily not as much Oblivion, but primarily Morrowind because it's just impossible to play like with the graphics that they have at that time because it's so hard. Like people who played it at the time were like, I could play it at the time because it was better than what I was used to. But now that I'm used to the new stuff, I can't play it anymore. Even though it's a game that they really love and would enjoy playing if they could get around the fact that they're just no longer used to the graphic style. And that's not to say that a game like Skyrim or the Elder Scrolls series could get away with making like an 8-bit version, but just games in general that don't rely on real like closeness to realism. Like people have the jokes about the PS1 PS1 graphics because at the time they were astounding. Like the selling point for one of my favorite games was that it was new and innovative because it had three-dimensional polygons. Like that was new for people back then. The idea of having a three-dimensional game world was new for people back then. And so for the time it was fantastic, but it hasn't stood the test of time. Most people don't play PS1 games anymore unless they're remastered. That's why you had the Crash Bandicoot remaster that was so popular, because people can't play the original anymore because it just doesn't feel smooth, you know?
Yeah, and no, that's a fantastic point on the remastered thing. Like that shows that the video game companies realize that like their graphics are out of date at that point, and like it becomes a factor that people can't get over. And I
Mm-hmm.
do wonder if it's companies just running the treadmill for games and saying we don't care if our games last more than the year because we're just counting on our first week sales or our first year sales when the
Mm-hmm.
graphics actually still do matter. And that goes back into the AAA gaming just being a video game pump out machine. Like it's just trying to pump out a bunch of titles and like not make any of them marquee and just count on the fact that based on quantity over quality, it'll make up its profits that it requires.
Yeah, and people are predicting, like, if AAA titles continue the way they do, people are predicting a collapse of the gaming industry, but not necessarily of gaming itself, because we're seeing now that, like, third party developers are at the forefront basically of the gaming scene right now. I'm pretty sure Fortnite is not a major company, is it?
No, it's a European company.
Yeah, so Fortnite, the most popular FPS like that's being played
Yeah,
right now.
currently, yeah.
Um the new big viral hit. You had games like Undertale, which I have other issues with, but that was a huge hit, and that was one dude. You had games like Subnautica, even, that was, practically, like, the name of the company is Unknown Worlds. Like, they're just a tiny company that nobody's heard of before, making great games. And I think if trends continue the way they are, with companies trying to crank out, award-winning titles in the same generic format every single time, like we saw this with Mass Effect Andromeda, that was lackluster. Fallout 4 was not received as well by critics as Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas were. People are not necessarily too fond of the Elder Scrolls Online. We're just seeing a trend now where AAA developers are trying to take a format and refine it, but that format is getting old for people. The most recent Final Fantasy wasn't very popular either, because it was basically just a less less functional clone of the original, like of the previous game. And it just didn't flow as well. Like, people are getting sick basically of big companies, cranking out the same stuff every year. And I think that's why indie games are so popular now, is because they're bringing these new, maybe not even new ideas. Like, survival horror is not a new thing, but just bringing new tastes and touches to it in ways that haven't been seen before. Um, and I think we're going to see, if companies don't wake up to that soon. I think we're going to see uh, a collapse of the actual physical gaming industry, and you'll just have lots of indie developers left, like on a format like Steam.
Well, don't forget about Nintendo either.
Well, and Nintendo's going to survive whatever the hell happens.
Yeah, because like everyone, that's a big thing with Nintendo. Everyone can always count on them pushing the limits and being innovative and just being a reliable product that like has a strong family relationship. Interestingly, and that's just
Yeah.
something that they've always been able to rely on. But it does seem like the AAA gaming industry, just companies like EA, Dice. Just like the big marquee ones that have come along with the development of the PlayStation and the Xbox.
Hmm.
It seems like those guys are in for a rude awakening, and I'd be curious to see if they would try and push more towards indie development, or if they would just shift what they're actually trying to do.
I wouldn't be surprised if it became kind of like they just start buying up indie companies and having
Uh,
these indie companies crank out stuff for them. Because they
yeah,
may
that would
look
make
at Disney
sense.
and the entertainment industry and say, well, that works for them and Warner Brothers, so why don't we try it? I don't think that would work, though, because then it would just turn into the same thing where it's like, oh, look, Unknown Worlds published another Subnautica clone. Great. Um, I think that they're going to have to just wake up and start coming up with new things. And here's the thing, people want new things, but in series that they're used to. Like the Mario franchise, like the most recent Mario game was in, like, a kind of open world, like, it was new, but it was still Mario, and it still felt like Mario.
Yeah.
And I think Nintendo, whoever whatever team does development for each of the game series in Nintendo is a absolute genius because they have mastered the idea of taking a well-loved franchise, doing something new with it, but not destroying what was already established. I think Breath of the Wild does a good job of that. Super Mario Odyssey does an excellent job of that. The Kirby franchise has survived for a long time doing exactly that. I think eventually they're just going to have to look over at Nintendo and say, they're coming up with new ideas for old games, and it's keeping those old games popular. And I think long-running franchises like Fallout, Far Cry, um, Call of Duty, stuff like that, they're going to have to wisen up and say, we need new, maybe even gimmicky type things, but that don't feel too gimmicky, and then recycle them every game. Because like Super Mario Odyssey is definitely really gimmicky with the hat thing.
Yeah.
But it's gimmicky in a way that is enjoyable for that game, and then you can just abandon it, and people are happy with it. And then you keep whatever game, like actual physical engine changes, smooth out gameplay and whatnot, and you just refine it so that you have something new every time, and then you just don't touch it again.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic point that like it's not like Nintendo and these indie companies aren't making sequels. It's that they're improving on the sequels and they're not just making the same game over and over again, like you're seeing in Call of Duty, like you're seeing in Battlefield, like you're seeing in Fallout. Like these companies are like they might as well be calling them remastered at this point. Like it's just the same game over and over with a different theme or like setting, but that's not enough to actually change what's happening in the game. You have to change the actual gameplay. That's not something they're really willing to do. So I think it's very interesting, but I also think it's interesting to see if the market they're appealing to, because it seems like the mainstream video game companies are appealing to the common video gamer, not really the hardcore video gamer. So I'd be curious to see if the common video gamer, someone that we've seen really invested in the video game scene right now, just turns away from it and says, I don't want to be playing video games anymore because it's not worth it, or they just turn to mobile games instead.
I think gaming is such a broad subject that people will just stop playing AAA titles before they stop playing video games entirely. Because there are definitely substitutes for AAA titles in each industry. There are, FPS titles like Fortnite that you can use to scratch your FPS itch if you're tired of Call of Duty or Battlefront. Um, you can go back to old games. Like people are still playing Battlefront 2 a lot because they're just like Battlefront 1 doesn't do it for me. The new Battlefront 2 doesn't do it for me. I'm just not going to play it. Um, I think people will continue to play video games, especially Nintendo games.
Yeah,
Unless Nintendo comes to the dark side and succumbs to the whole let's crank out a clone every year. But they've proven with the Switch that they're not willing to do that.
yeah,
It's almost like the Wii U was their attempts at that. Like just here's another Wii unit, and then they were just like that didn't work for us. People hated it. We're going to try something completely new and flip it on its head, and that's what the Switch was.
yeah, and really, I think with the Wii U, I thought they actually thought that people just loved the Wii concept and they wanted more of it. And then when it turned out people did, and it was like okay, because Nintendo's always trying to experiment. That's why they had the giant D-pad thing, and like it's clear,
Mm-hmm.
they like you can draw the connection from the Wii to the Wii U to the Switch based on just like the importance placed on the D-pad. But I think it's very interesting, yeah, that like Nintendo's always held up against all the competition, and really, I'd say they're going to survive as long as, frankly, Shigeru Miyamoto stays alive. Which, frankly, he's not too old, but like you can never trust the successors in
Wait,
any of these
I thought
companies.
he was dead. Who was the guy who died?
No, that's the president.
Oh,
Miyamoto is just the lead video game designer.
oh yeah, he's old. Yeah, that worries me a little bit. I wonder if it can't purely be all him.
No,
Like,
I
surely
mean it
not.
can't, but like you always take a risk whenever you have to bring in a successor.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll find a good one though. I feel like the company is they've probably known him well enough for this long to say we can find someone who thinks like him.
Oh, he's only 65. He's doing all right.
Well, Leo was only 64. I'm sorry. Carrie Fisher was only like in
Leia.
her 60s. If
Well, I
I mean,
mean,
that's what you know her as, right?
Carrie Fisher also did a ton of drugs when she was
This is true.
so
Yeah,
you know that's like 10 years or whatever.
yeah. Well, she had a heart attack probably because of the copious amounts of cocaine and stuff that she did in her youth. But yeah,
Yeah.
what if you? I mean, you don't know anything about Miyamoto's, personal life. He could be doing, lines every day.
Well, based on the fourth recommended question on Google search recommendations, I know that he's left-handed. I have no clue why that's the fourth recommended one after what games he's made, what's his net worth, and who is Mario and Luigi.
Wait, he does, but he doesn't voice them.
No, he does. He created them.
Oh, okay, yeah. I guess that's a weird way of wording that question, though.
Yeah. So I guess it would be who are. Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, yeah.
But do you think that VR is gonna really take off with the indie scene? Because it seems like that's mostly sticking to the AAA games right now.
Because I think it's sticking to the AAA titles right now because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
It's in its early stages. People can't really afford it. Plus, it's instantly somehow succumbed to the exclusivity thing, where the Vive, you can't play the same games on the Vive as you can on the what's the other Oculus Rift,
Yeah.
and whatnot, uh, which is ridiculous. Like that will kill VR if they continue with that. If they keep up the exclusivity thing, because it's just ridiculous. It's really petty. Um, I don't understand it personally. But yeah, like there's things that are exclusive to Steam VR. Like it's ridiculous. If something kills VR, even beyond like people get bored of it because it's gimmicky or whatever, it'll be the whole exclusivity thing. Because people are not going to spend $400 per console to buy 4 VR consoles. I think what's going to have to happen is there's going to
Oops.
have to be a shift from it's going to have to become less expensive, and it's going to have to be like you buy a VR headset and it's an accessory like a microphone or a mouse or something, rather than it being like its own console, which is how they kind of sell it right now, which they kind of have to because it's priced like a console.
Yeah. No, it's like
Um,
$1,000. Yeah.
yeah, but when they become more affordable, which I'm hoping they do eventually become more affordable, it'll become more of an accessory for games, which will be much more preferable. And
Yeah.
I think there may. The problem is that a lot of people just can't tolerate it. A lot of people who try it can't stand the shakiness. And so unless they fix that shakiness, which there are debates that that's impossible, that it's impossible to fix that horizontal shaking. Um, then if they can't fix that shakiness, then it's going to be a very specific subset of people who can tolerate it and don't get motion sick and whatnot, who are going to be able to play it.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't seen that many people coming out and saying that it makes them really motion sick. I know I was seeing that initially, but I haven't been seeing it recently anymore. So I don't know if they fixed it or if those people have just given up on it or whatnot.
Well,
But
people just give up. Like they were doing a whole. I was watching Boogie2988. He's a popular YouTuber giving an analysis on his thoughts on VR, and he said a lot of people still get sick from it, and until you can fix that or change it, he thinks that augmented reality is going to be much more popular because a it allows you to move around more. B you're not going to risk swinging your controller into a TV or something. Um, and C people who get motion sick and stuff like that are not going to throw up every time they try to play a game for more than an hour. Um, so I disagree that augmented reality will be popular
yeah, me
because
too.
like
Because it defeats the
I could
purpose. It's not profound.
right I could see that becoming like a thing for sports games like the next like a super futuristic like FIFA title where you actually have to physically play soccer to play the game or something like that. But I don't think augmented reality will take off too much. I think it might for mobile games. I think mobile games augmented reality might be a super cool thing, but
Well,
I
yeah.
don't think mainline games are going to have a lot of augmented reality.
Yeah, I mean, Pokemon Go demonstrated that. And I mean, I'm surprised that nothing's come out in since then. Really, it's been almost 2 years now since Pokemon Go
Hmm.
went really super viral. And dang it, I keep doing that. And yeah, like I'm surprised Nintendo hasn't come out with anything else with that either. Maybe they realized that it was they like people aren't really looking for another artificial reality game from them, but still. But yeah, I'm surprised to hear that the motion sickness thing still hasn't gotten fixed by virtual reality. I'm kind of surprised that's not getting any better. But I disagree that that it's in any way gimmicky. I think that virtual reality is a profound experience, and it's different from gaming in any other way. It's not like I don't know, playing with the 3DS or something and getting to see, ooh, they're popping out of the screen or whatever. Like it's
Yeah, the 3DS. Oh my
yeah, like
god.
that's a gimmicky game. But like this is just a
Yeah,
completely different way to play video games, and like it allows you to do things that you can't do in any other games. It allows
yeah.
for a new level of immersion, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they can get the motion blur or the whatever it is that's
It's
causing the
called
shaking.
horizontal. It's called horizontal, like the shaking of the horizontal, which means just like that the horizon line is never. People use horizon lines and pin like basically just lines in general as focal points. And so in games they kind of jitter a little bit, and then you have standard graphical glitches because those don't go away just because it's VR. There are still graphical glitches in games,
Yeah.
and that can screw up people's perceptions of the world around them. And your brain actually thinks. And here's one of those things is that they try to make VR games look too real. And one of the most successful recent VR games was this really cartoony, like gladiator game, where literally just the whole thing was you bash people's heads in with really rubbery like weapons and stuff like that. And it's cartoony, but it flows really well. So you get like the person who was like reviewing it said like more so than in games that are hyper realistic on VR, you get really lost in it, and so like there's space in front of you that you're like there's space there, I can walk there. It looks really cartoony, but that's a space that I can walk in, but you can't. And so they were saying that the motion stopping system, like they have a grid to tell you when you're getting too close to a wall. He said that he was ignoring that subconsciously and walking into things because the game, despite not being realistic, still felt like it was an actual world space that he was walking around in, and he couldn't control like his movement to stop him from because his body was saying there is nothing there. You can just walk into that, but he knew that there was like a wall and stuff there, and he actually busted his TV because he was like getting the warning about you're too close to a wall, and he said like, oh well, if I hit the wall, it's not a big deal, but it was his TV. Um, so he kind of screwed that up. But he said that that's it was funny. His review was like, "It's a great game. Don't buy it if you don't want to spend $4,000 replacing your HD TV." Um, but yeah, and that goes back to the whole graphics thing. I think VR could probably actually fix its problems with horizontal shaking if they just tone down graphics and make them more like conventional graphics rather than trying to make them hyper realistic.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, actually. And like it goes off of what we're saying with AAA games needing to tone down their focus on making the graphics more and more realistic. Is that these VR games just need to accept that they're not going to be able to make it perfect, and because of that, they're going to be piling money into a fruitless endeavor, and b making the game a worse experience for the people that are playing it. So they just need to find their own art style again, and then just use that because ultimately it's the immersion that gets you in. It's not the fact that it looks like real life, and like the fact that
Right.
like it is blocking your field of vision, that like you can't hear anything else. That's what gets you into the game. Like it's not, oh, this looks super realistic, so it tricks my brain. But I wonder how the brain does it in real life, that like we don't get any horizontal shakiness, because like if you think about it, your head is always moving. So like it's weird that like we don't constantly get that. I wonder if the brain just corrects for it automatically.
It's because like with animation, every like the horizon line that you're seeing is changing. It is not some stagnant thing in reality. It's changing as you move your head. So they have there's minute glitches with that because it's pixelated and everything, and that causes you to kind of get this wobble effect when you're playing. Like you've seen VR games, it looks a little wobbly when people are moving around and stuff because the game is constantly A, updating the entities around you, B, updating where your head and body is, C, trying to fix all of the background elements so that they're in line with where you are. And that causes a lot of wobbliness with the animation. And so it just doesn't feel smooth and it makes people sick.
I wonder if it would help if they just tracked where your eye was looking and then just made wherever your eye is looking the horizon line and just kept that a constant and then just changed everything around that.
I think that would require the problem, of course, is also processing power. You have to
Yes,
take into
yeah.
account how much because the
And like they're
you
already on the edge, yeah.
I think it would just be better for them to do something like it would be cool if they took some because you know the art style of Borderlands.
Yeah.
It would be cool. Like people don't, and this has been proven is that like your body will believe something is a is reality if it's consistent. So if you have like a really cartoony reality, you'll just be like, oh, I'm walking in cartoon world. Um, I think the psychological assumption that game developers make is that you won't be immersed as if it's a real world. You won't feel like you're not playing a video game if
Yeah.
it's not really realistic graphics.
Yeah, which is what we just refuted by saying that it's the
Mm-hmm.
immersion and not the actual realisticness of the game. And I think it would be really cool to see a lot more games that do have those cartoony styles, and it would almost be more interesting to play games where like you feel like you're in a completely different world instead of you're just in a different place in our own world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think it's going to be more porting games to VR in the future, or it's going to be just developing them independently for
Well,
VR?
they're already doing that. Fallout 4 recently released a VR title that's literally just Fallout 4 in VR, and it's gotten off pretty well actually. People are saying it's one of the best VR games out there, and it's just a port. Um, so I guess with the success of Fallout support, perhaps that is the direction that they're going to go in. They're going to say, hey, we're just going to take existing games, port them to VR, and then future games will just have added VR support.
Yeah, that seems like
Um,
that'd be very interesting if like they sold like a game just normally. It wasn't like Fallout the VR edition. It was just like you get Fallout 4 and then like you can go to the settings and like if you want to equip like a VR headset, you could just play it in VR if
the
you.
the problem is that they had to change the physics for it, so you couldn't play it on the same engine. That's why they had to release it as a
Yeah,
separate thing. But
that
it
makes
was
sense.
just a port. But yeah, eventually they could have something where it's like we're just going to shift the game so that it's VR, like in a settings or something. And that is when I think headsets will start transitioning from being consoles in their own right to being accessories.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that'll be really interesting to see once computing power starts to ramp up again, because Moore's law is starting to break down. But
Mm-hmm.
once we hit the quantum computing, it's just gonna skyrocket all over again.
I can't wait to play Fallout, or I can't wait to play Doom on my quantum computer.
Yeah, on your quantum brain.
Yeah, yeah, just playing Doom. Can Doom play it? Your eyeball. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something really interesting actually. I was hearing on Joe Rogan's podcast, which I don't listen to a lot. Is he was mentioning how a lot of people their perception of androids, what they think of an android really is just someone who has a robotic or like a metallic enhancement to something on the outer part of their face or their brain. But anywhere else, you can put in whatever technology you want, and you're not an android.
Well,
So,
you sometimes they consider you a cyborg then, like if you have like a robotic arm or something.
well, yeah, but I mean, like nobody calls like Oscar Pistorius an android or something, or like if you get a knee replacement, or like I don't know,
That's
you get like a
true.
couple screws in your jaw or something because like you broke your jaw or something, you have to get it fixed. Like nobody calls you an android, so like it's entirely just how you look.
Well, also I think there has to be some kind of like cyberkinetic part. Like it can't just be like oh like Iron Man. I guess you could people wouldn't call Iron Man a cyborg, but I think that that would be the appropriate term for him would be a cyborg because he uses. I think it's all about like physically enhancing, not compensating for something. So like a paraplegic who has legs that function like normal legs, they wouldn't necessarily. They're not doing anything that's beyond what a normal human can do. I think the requirement for an android or a cyborg is that they have to have something that enhances their physical characteristics.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, nobody wants the paraplegic that has legs that function like arms, or
Oh yeah, oh my god, he's an android. What is he? He's gonna do normal things in day to day life. My god.
yeah, no, but that would just be weird. And I think that's a good place to leave off. Honestly, I think that pretty well summarizes the two big things that I wanted us to talk about today. I wanted us to talk about Star Wars to our heart's delight and get a really good start on video games.
All
Okay.
right, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to have you back on because, as you can see, like even though 3 hours sounds like a lot, we basically only talked about two things the entire time.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, if you guys enjoyed listening to that as much as we enjoyed talking about Star Wars and video games, make sure to give us a review saying so. Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That'd be fantastic. Other podcasting platforms, you can do that as well, but, I'm not going to look at it on there. You can also go to our YouTube channel, Topical Rationalizing the Monkey Brain. You can give us a subscribe on there. You can hit the bell if you want to. You can give us a comment saying how much you like it. You can give us a like. You can, I don't know, click on every single video, have them all running in different tabs, rack up those views for us, give us that sweet, sweet YouTube advertising money if I ever get enough views to get monetized. And you know what? We're going to see you next time. So I've already recorded 5 of these this week.